Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy became a high-class devil with water powers, and married Rias? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Confluence of powers. Darkness. Then pain. Sharp and electric, shooting through every nerve ending. Percy Jackson gasped awake, his lungs burning as if he'd been underwater too long, which made no sense. Water had never hurt him before. He blinked rapidly, his vision adjusting to the crimson-tinged darkness. Above him, a vaulted ceiling of polished obsidian reflected dim light from ornate walls that flickered with flames too steady to be natural. This wasn't his cabin at Camp Half-Blood. This wasn't anywhere he recognized. You're finally awake. Percy jerked upright, instantly regretting it as vertigo crashed over him. A young woman stood at the foot of the bed. No, not a bed, an altar of some kind. She had striking crimson hair flowing past her shoulders, intelligent eyes, and an expression hovering between satisfaction and concern. "Where am I?" His voice sounded wrong. Deeper, smoother somehow. "My private chambers in the Grimoire estate," she answered, approaching with measured steps. "I'm Rias Grimoire." Percy tried to stand, but his body refused to cooperate. Something felt fundamentally different. Like his skin didn't fit quite right, like his blood flowed with unfamiliar heat. "What happened to me?" He managed to swing his legs over the edge of the altar. "Last thing I remember." The memory hit him with such force he nearly doubled over. The sky had split open above Long Island Sound. A writhing mass of cosmic darkness pouring through the breach. Tendrils of primordial night lashed out, dissolving anything they touched. Trees, rocks, magical barriers. Camp Half-Blood's defenses were failing. "We can't hold it back," Annabeth shouted over the maelstrom, her blonde hair whipping across her face. "That's Erebos himself." Primordial darkness. Percy stood at the shoreline. The last line of defense between the camp and total annihilation. His friends lay wounded behind him. The remains of the Argo II smoldered on the beach. Jason was down. Piper was trying desperately to keep him breathing. Hazel's magic was exhausted, and Frank could barely maintain human form. "I know what to do," Percy said, feeling the power of the ocean surging through him. He'd never attempted anything like this before, but there was no other choice. Annabeth grabbed his arm. "Percy, whatever you're thinking, tell my mom I love her." He kissed her forehead and turned away before she could see his eyes. Before she could stop him, Percy waded into the water, calling to his father's domain with everything he had. The sea responded, lifting him on a massive column of water that rose toward the cosmic breach. He felt his body beginning to tear apart as he channeled more power than any demigod was meant to contain. "Close," he commanded the ocean, forcing it upward like a massive stopper against the hole in reality. The water churned and boiled as it met Erebos's darkness, and Percy became the conduit between elements never meant to touch. The pain was beyond description. Percy Jackson was being unmade, molecule by molecule. But the breach was closing, the darkness retreating. His last thought was simple gratitude that his friends would live. Then nothing. "You died," Rias said quietly, pulling Percy back to the present. "Or you were about to. I found you at that exact moment, the instant between life and death." Percy looked at his hands. They seemed normal enough, but when he concentrated, he felt something alien stirring beneath his skin. "What did you do to me?" Rias lifted her chin, her expression a complex mixture of pride and caution. "I reincarnated you as a devil. As part of my peerage." "A devil," Percy repeated, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "Like pitchforks and deals at crossroads." A small smile touched her lips. "Not exactly, though contracts are certainly part of our culture." Percy closed his eyes, searching inward. The familiar connection to the ocean remained, but now it felt different. Deeper somehow, but also changed. Like seawater mixed with something darker and more potent. "I should be dead," he said finally. "You're not." Rias approached, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I use DA mutation piece, an extremely rare evil piece. You're unusual, Percy Jackson. Your soul was powerful enough that a normal piece wouldn't have worked." Percy's jaw tightened. You had no right. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But I couldn't let such potential be wasted. And something tells me you're not quite ready to leave this world behind. A crystal decanter of water sat on a nearby table. Percy focused on it, reaching out with that familiar part of himself. The water responded instantly, rising from the container, but it was different now. The liquid seemed to shimmer with a faint crimson energy. The same color as the strange power he felt coursing through his veins. Fascinating, Rias murmured, watching the water hover in midair. Your original powers remain, but they're merging with your devil energy. Anger flashed through Percy, and the water responded, not just rising but suddenly boiling, steam hissing into the air as droplets began to orbit his clenched fist like tiny satellites. Turn me back, he demanded. Rias met his gaze steadily. I cannot. Reincarnation is permanent. The water crashed to the floor, splashing across the polished stone. Percy felt exhaustion sweep through him. His new body still unfamiliar, still adjusting. My friends, he managed. My mother. They think I'm dead. They saw you die saving them, Rias said gently. You succeeded, Percy. The breach was sealed. Your sacrifice meant something. Percy slumped back against the altar. A devil, the son of Poseidon, now a creature from another pantheon entirely. What would his father think? Would Poseidon even recognize him anymore? Why me? He asked finally. Rias crossed her arms, studying him with those intelligent eyes. I've been monitoring dimensional anomalies for years. When I sensed the breach forming between your world and Erebos' domain, I was merely observing, until I felt your power. The way you commanded the sea. She shook her head, something like wonder in her expression. In that moment, I knew you were someone extraordinary. Before Percy could respond, the chamber doors swung open. A young man with short blonde hair entered, his expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Lady Rias, your brother is requesting an update on your project. His eyes shifted to Percy. I see he's finally awake. Kiba, meet Percy Jackson, Rias said. Percy, this is Yuto Kiba, my knight. Percy stood, finding his balance still unsteady but improving. Knight, like a chess piece. Rias smiled. In a manner of speaking. Each member of a devil's peerage fulfills a different role, based on their abilities and the evil piece used in their reincarnation. And what am I? Percy asked, not entirely sure he wanted the answer. You're unique, she replied. The mutation piece I used was a pawn. But it's been altered in ways I'm still trying to understand. Your demigod nature combined with your specific powers created something unprecedented. Kiba approached, offering his hand. Welcome to the underworld, Percy Jackson. Things might seem strange at first, but you'll adjust. Percy hesitated, then accepted the handshake. Kiba's grip was firm, his smile genuine. Lady Rias, Kiba continued. Lord Searzex emphasized the importance of proper introduction protocols, considering the unusual circumstances. Rias sighed. My brother always did love his formalities. Very well, Percy. If you're feeling strong enough, it's time you learned about your new home. The underworld defied every expectation Percy had formed from his experiences with Hades' domain. Instead of the bleak fields of Asphodel or the tortuous depths of Tartarus, he found himself walking through what appeared to be a lavish estate set against a landscape that seemed almost Earth-like. If not for the crimson sky overhead and the occasionally impossible geography in the distance. This is the territory of House Grimori, Rias explained as they walked through manicured gardens. Percy noticed how servants and guards alike bowed respectfully as she passed. One of the remaining 72 pillars of Devil Society. Pillars. The original pure-blooded devil houses. Many were lost during the Great War. Percy absorbed this information silently, still trying to reconcile his new reality. They passed beneath an archway of black roses that seemed to whisper as they walked underneath. Your mythology had its underworld ruled by a single god, Rias continued. Ours is more politically complex. 4 Satan lords govern the major aspects of our society, with the noble houses controlling their respective territories. And where do I fit into all this? Percy asked, watching a fountain nearby. Without conscious thought, he felt the water respond to his presence, rippling slightly as he passed. That remains to be seen, Rias said with a slight smile. But as part of my peerage, you'll have certain responsibilities and protections. They emerged into a vast courtyard where several people appeared to be engaged in combat training. Percy immediately recognized the supernatural nature of their abilities. One young woman with dark hair was generating crackling electricity between her palms, while another person had sprouted massive black wings. My peerage, Rias said proudly. Though still incomplete, the training paused as they noticed their approach. Percy felt their curious stares, some welcoming, others more reserved. Everyone, Rias announced, this is Percy Jackson, our newest member. A small white-haired girl stepped forward, examining Percy with expressionless eyes. You smell like the ocean, she said bluntly. Kaneko has enhanced senses, Rias explained. Percy was a demigod, son of Poseidon. This revelation sent a ripple of murmurs through the group. Percy shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. A demigod. The young woman who had been manipulating electricity approached, her long black hair tied in a ponytail. That explains the massive power signature. I'm Akano Himahima, Lady Rias's queen. Her smile was friendly but evaluating. We should test his capabilities, Kiba suggested, his hand resting casually on the hilt of a sword Percy hadn't noticed before. If he's to join us in raiding games, we need to understand how his powers work now. Percy raised an eyebrow. Raiding games. Competitive battles between devil peerages, Rias explained. They're how young devils like myself establish reputation and advance in society. Percy felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the same feeling he got before a quest or battle. So I'm meant to fight for you now. Something in his tone made Rias turn to face him directly. With me, she corrected. Not for me. Every member of my peerage has their own story, their own reasons for being here. I don't seek servants, Percy. I seek companions who can grow stronger together. Their eyes locked, and Percy felt something unexpected, a sense that she was being genuine. After years of being a pawn in the games of gods, he developed a decent ability to detect manipulation. Rias Grimori might have reincarnated him without permission, but there was no malice in her actions. All right, he said finally. Let's see what I can do now. Water erupted from the training ground's reservoir, forming a swirling barrier around Percy as Kiba darted toward him, sword flashing with impossible speed. The knight's blade struck the water wall and Percy felt the impact like a distant echo through his consciousness. With a thought, he hardened the water, crystallizing it into a moan. Airy shield that deflected Kiba's next thrust. The blonde swordsman grinned, clearly enjoying the challenge. Impressive control, he called, dancing back as Percy sent icy projectiles whistling through the air. But can you handle multiple opponents? Akano descended from above, lightning crackling between her fingertips. The electricity struck Percy's water shield, and for the first time in his life, he felt the shock of his own element conducting energy against him. He gasped, dropping to one knee as the water splashed uselessly around him. Your powers need refinement, Rias observed from the sidelines. You're still thinking like a demigod, not a devil. Percy gritted his teeth, frustrated. Throughout his life, water had been his domain of absolute control. Now it felt like learning to walk again. Again, he said, pushing himself up. This time, when he called the water, Percy reached for that unfamiliar heat in his veins as well, the devil energy Rias had mentioned. The response was immediate and startling. The water that rose around him now had a crimson tinge, moving with greater speed and purpose. When Kiba attacked again, Percy didn't just create a barrier, he fashioned a trident of hardened water, meeting the sword strike with a weapon of his own. The impact sent both of them skidding backward. Now we're talking, Kiba laughed, genuine excitement in his eyes. Akano attacked again, but this time Percy was ready. Instead of letting the lightning strike his water directly, he split the liquid into dozens of separate streams, diffusing the electrical attack while simultaneously using the charged water droplets to create a momentary cage around Akano. My, she said, looking impressed as she dispelled the water with a pulse of her own energy. Our new friend learns quickly. Percy felt sweat beading on his forehead. This new way of using his powers demanded more concentration, more precise control than before. But there was also a rush to it, a sense of discovery that reminded him of his early days at Camp Half-Blood, learning what it meant to be a demigod. The training continued for hours, with different members of Rias's peerage testing Percy's ability. wise in helping him understand the nuances of devil combat. By sunset, or what passed for sunset in this realm of perpetual crimson sky, Percy was exhausted but exhilarated. You have tremendous potential, Rias said as they walked back toward the main estate. With proper training, your unique combination of powers could make you one of the strongest pawns in devil history. Is that what matters here? Percy asked. Power rankings. Rias considered his question seriously. To many, yes, devil society values strength and lineage above all else. But that's not why I brought you into my peerage. Then why? She paused, gazing out over her family's territory. Because I believe the future belongs to those who can adapt, who can bring new perspectives and abilities to our world. The old ways are changing, Percy. Some resist it, but change comes nonetheless. Something in her words resonated with Percy's own experiences, the way the Greek and Roman camps had eventually needed to overcome their ancient divisions. How the gods themselves had been forced to acknowledge their demigod children. I still don't know if I belong here, he admitted. Few of us do, at first, she replied with a small smile. But give it time. As they reached the main doors of the estate, a servant approached and bowed deeply to Rias. My lady, Lord Sirzex requests your presence in the Grand Hall. He wishes to meet your new pawn. Rias's expression tightened slightly. My brother doesn't waste time. Very well, she turned to Percy, ready to meet one of the four Satan lords. Percy thought of all his past encounters with gods and immortals. As ready as I'll ever be. The Grand Hall of House Grimoire was a masterpiece of underworld architecture, soaring columns of black marble veined with gold, moss. Sieve chandeliers that seemed to hold captured starlight, and a floor polished to mirror-like perfection. At the far end, seated in an ornate chair that stopped just short of being a throne, was a man who radiated power in a way Percy had felt only from major gods. My dear sister, he said warmly as they approached, rising to his feet. Though his face appeared young, there was ancient wisdom in his eyes. And this must be the dimensional anomaly I've heard so much about. Percy tensed at being called an anomaly, but Rias placed a calming hand on his arm. Brother, this is Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, now reincarnated into my peerage. Percy, this is Sirzex Lucifer, one of the four great Satans and my elder brother. Percy wasn't sure if he should bow, kneel, or shake hands. He settled for a respectful nod. Sir, Sirzex laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. Such formality from a demigod. I've encountered your kind before, though rarely under such interesting circumstances. You've met other demigods. Percy couldn't hide his surprise. The boundaries between pantheons are more permeable than most realize, Sirzex replied, descending from his dais to approach them. Up close, the power radiating from him was almost overwhelming. Though direct interference in each other's affairs is generally avoided. My sister's actions were unexpected. Rias lifted her chin. The circumstances were exceptional. Indeed. Sirzex circled Percy, examining him with undisguised curiosity. A son of Poseidon, reincarnated with a mutation piece. I can feel the ocean in you still. But changed. Merging with devil essence in ways I've never observed before. Percy remained still under the examination, though every instinct screamed to back away from this being whose power dwarfed his own. Tell me, Percy Jackson, Sirzex said, stopping directly in front of him. How did it feel to die closing a breach to Erebos's realm? The direct question caught Percy off guard. I don't remember dying, just the decision to do what was necessary. Sirzex nodded, as if this confirmed something. Selflessness. Interesting quality in a devil. His eyes shifted to Rias. You've always had excellent instincts. Sister. Then you approve? Rias asked, a hint of tension in her voice suggesting she would proceed regardless of the answer. Approve. I'm fascinated. Sirzex smiled. But others may not share my enthusiasm. The old families are already whispering about the strange power they sensed entering our realm. Some will see this as an opportunity, others as a threat. Let them whisper, Rias said dismissively. Easy to say when you're not the one who must maintain political balance. Sirzex returned his attention to Percy. You should know that your presence here has already caused ripples, particularly among those houses that still cling to notions of devil purity. Percy had dealt with prejudice before, both in the mortal world and among certain gods who looked down on demigods. I didn't ask to be brought here. Yet here you are, Circex replied. And what matters now is what you do with this second chance my sister has given you. He turned away, moving back toward his seat. Train him well, Rias. I suspect he'll need every advantage in the coming days. What's that supposed to mean? Percy asked. Circex merely smiled. You'll know soon enough. The underworld has a way of testing newcomers, especially unusual ones. As they left the grand hall, Percy couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just been evaluated for some purpose beyond his understanding. Your brother is intense. Rias sighed. He carries the burden of leadership in tumultuous times. But he's fair, and his support means others will think twice before moving against you openly. Moving against me? I've been here less than a day. And already you represent change, she said. Something many devils fear above all else. Days stretched into weeks as Percy adjusted to his new existence. The Grimoire estate became familiar territory, and training with Rias's peerage gave him purpose during a time when he might otherwise have been consumed by homesickness and grief. His powers continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The merging of his demigod abilities with devil energy created possibilities he'd never imagined. He could now freeze water instantly, superheat it to steam, or infuse it with destructive energy that made his previous hydrokinesis seem tame by comparison. Most surprising was his growing ability to sense water at much greater distances and in foe. RMS he'd never detected before, the moisture in the air, the water content of plants and creatures, even the trace elements in seemingly solid objects. Your affinity for water is becoming something more comprehensive, Rias observed during one training session. An elemental mastery that extends beyond simple manipulation. Percy demonstrated by drawing moisture from the air itself, condensing it into a swirling sphere between his palms. With concentration, he infused it with devil energy until the water glowed with crimson light, then shaped it into a perfect replica of Rias's family crest. Impressive control, she said. Genuine admiration in her voice. You're adapting faster than I anticipated. Percy let the water dissipate. I'm still trying to understand the limits. Sometimes it feels like there aren't any, like I could pull water from anywhere if I tried hard enough. That kind of thinking is very devil-like, Rias noted with a small smile. We don't tend to acknowledge limitations. They had fallen into a comfortable routine together, training in the mornings, lessons on devil society and politics in the afternoons, and evenings spent either with the peerage or, increasingly often, just the two of them discussing their respective worlds. Percy found himself drawn to Rias's intelligence and determination. She carried the weight of her family name with a dignity that reminded him of Annabeth. But there was something distinctly different about her, a confidence that bordered on ambition, tempered by genuine care for those under her protection. There's something I've been meaning to ask, Percy said one evening as they walked through the Grimoire Gardens. The crimson moon of the underworld cast everything in a faint red glow that Percy had finally stopped finding unsettling. Why did you really reincarnate me? The truth. Rias paused beside a fountain, its water responding subtly to Percy's presence by rising in slightly higher arcs. The truth, she considered for a moment. Because I recognized something in you at that moment between life and death, a spirit that refuses to be broken, no matter the odds. Devils respect power, Percy. But what truly changes worlds is will. That's not what I expected you to say. She smiled. What did you expect? That I collected you like some rare specimen? That I saw only your demigod powers as an asset? Maybe, Percy admitted. Gods and immortals usually have ulterior motives. I won't pretend there wasn't strategic value in adding someone of your abilities to my peerage, Rias acknowledged. But that wasn't my primary motivation. When I saw you sacrifice everything to save your friends, I simply knew you deserved another chance. Percy was silent for a long moment, watching the water dance in the fountain. Thank you, he said finally, for being honest, and for the second chance, even if this isn't exactly how I would have chosen to spend it. You're welcome. Rias's expression turned serious. Though I should warn you, that second chance may soon be tested. Word has reached me that Diodora Astaroth has been making inquiries about you. Astaroth, one of the 72 pillars. Rias nodded, pleased at his retention of their lessons. Yes, and Diodora is problematic. Ambitious, with a reputation for collecting unique additions to his peerage by any means necessary. You think he's targeting me? I think he sees you as both a curiosity and a potential threat to the established order. He's very traditional in his views about what devils should be. Percy felt a familiar pre-battle tension settling into his shoulders. Let him come. I've dealt with entitled immortals before. Careful, Rias cautioned. Underestimating devil politics can be deadly. Diodora is clever. He won't challenge you directly unless he's certain of victory. The summons to attend the gathering of young devils came 3 days later. Percy had been training with Kaneko, learning to counter physical attacks with precisely timed water barriers. When a messenger arrived bearing an ornate invitation sealed with the combined crests of the 4 great Satans. It seems my brother is accelerating matters, as murmured after reading the invitation. This gathering is typically held once a year, not mid-season like this. Is that bad? Percy asked, toweling off after the intense training session. It's unusual, she replied. And in devil society, unusual events rarely happen without purpose. The gathering was to be held in neutral territory, a grand pavilion in the central region of the underworld. Here the domains of the 4 Satans intersected. As Rias explained during their journey, these events served multiple purposes: social networking for young devils, political maneuvering for the older houses, and subtle evaluation of up-and-coming talents. Think of it as part debutante ball, part military review, she said as their transportation, a magical circle that felt disconcertingly similar to shadow travel, deposited them outside an enormous structure that resembled a cross between a Greek temple and a Gothic cathedral. Percy adjusted the formal attire Rias had insisted he wear, black with subtle blue accents that, she explained, acknowledged his heritage while establishing his new allegiance. So I just mingle. Rias gave him a look that was half amusement, half warning. You represent House Grimoire tonight. Be respectful but never subservient. Answer questions directly but reveal nothing you wouldn't want used against you later. And above all, stay close to me or another member of our peerage. Inside, the pavilion opened into a vast hall filled with devils of varying ages, all dressed in finery that would have made the gods of Olympus nod with approval. Elaborate magical constructs floated overhead, providing light and occasional bursts of illusory displays, battles from devil history, maps of territories, or abstract patterns of pure energy. Percy felt eyes on him immediately. Word of the demigod turned devil had clearly spread. Lady Rias Grimoire, announced a steward at the entrance, and peerage. Rias moved with practiced grace, acknowledging greetings from the Arius devils as they made their way deeper into the gathering. Percy followed her lead, keeping his expression neutral despite the whispers that followed in their wake. Ah, the famous mutation piece we've heard so much about, came a voice from their right. Percy turned to see a young man with dark hair and an unsettling smile approaching. Something about him immediately set Percy on edge, a feeling he'd learned to trust through years of facing monsters and gods with hidden agendas. Diodora, Rias greeted coolly. I wasn't aware you had a personal interest in my peerage. How could I not? Diodora's eyes fixed on Percy with undisguised curiosity. A demigod from another pantheon, reincarnated through a mutation piece. It's unprecedented. He extended a hand to Percy. Diodora Astaroth, welcome to Devil Society. Percy accepted the handshake, immediately noting the way Diodora's fingers tensed slightly, as if testing his strength. Percy Jackson, thanks for the welcome. I understand. You were quite powerful in your previous life, Diodora continued. Son of Poseidon, wasn't it? I've always found water-based abilities fascinating. There was something in his tone that made Percy's instincts flare. It has its uses, I'm sure. Diodora's smile never reached his eyes. I wonder, though, how such abilities translate to raiding games. The controlled environment, the strategic elements, quite different from the chaotic battles of demigods, I imagine. Are you proposing something, Diodora? Rias asked directly, merely curious. He spread his hands in a gesture of innocence that Percy didn't buy for a second. Though I would welcome the opportunity to test your new acquisition in a friendly match. For educational purposes, of course. Before either Percy or Rias could respond, a commotion near the center of the hall drew everyone's attention. Seer's ex Lucifer had arrived, accompanied by the other Satan lords. Ah, duty calls, Diodora said with a slight bow. We'll continue this discussion another time. He departed, but not before giving Percy one last evaluating look. "I don't like him," Percy said once Diodora was out of earshot. "Few do," Rias agreed. "But he's powerful and well-connected. Be wary of him, Percy. He doesn't make idle conversation." The rest of the evening proceeded in a similar fashion, introductions to various devil houses, some genuinely welcoming, others clearly assessing the potential threat or advantage Percy represented. By the time Sirzex called for the formal presentations to begin, Percy was mentally exhausted from navigating the complex social currents. Young devils from various houses were called forward to demonstrate their abilities or announce their recent achievements. When it was Rias's turn, she approached the central dais with Percy and the rest of her peerage. "House Grimory is pleased to introduce the newest member of our family," she announced formally. "Percy Jackson, reincarnated through a mutation piece, brings unique abilities and perspective to our ranks." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sirzex, seated on an elevated throne alongside the other Satans, leaned forward with interest. "Perhaps a demonstration," he suggested, though Percy recognized it was more command than request. Rias nodded to Percy, who stepped forward. They had prepared for this possibility, selecting a demonstration that would be impressive without revealing the full extent of his evolving powers. Percy closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. Then, with practiced control, he called forth water, not from any visible source, but extracted from the very air of the hall. The moisture condensed into a swirling sphere above his palm, growing larger as he pulled more water from the atmosphere. When the sphere reached the size of a beach ball, Percy infused it with devil energy, causing it to glow with crimson light from within. Then, with a gesture, he transformed the water into a series of shapes, first the Grimory crest, then a perfect replica of the pavilion itself, and finally a detailed trident that rotated slowly in midair. With a final flourish, Percy divided the water into thousands of tiny droplets that scattered throughout the hall before vanishing completely, leaving the air noticeably drier but otherwise undisturbed. A moment of silence followed, then scattered applause that grew into genuine appreciation. Percy caught Sirzex nodding approvingly, while beside him, a green-haired Satan, Ajuka Beelzebub, if Percy remembered correctly, leaned over to whisper something in Sirzek's ear. "Well done," Rias murmured as they returned to their position. The demonstrations continued, but Percy noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Other young devils now watched him with increased interest or wariness. He had made an impression, for better or worse. As the formal portion of the gathering concluded and the assembled devils returned to socializing, Diodora approached them once more, this me flanked by members of his own peerage. "Impressive control," he said to Percy, his smile tight, though rather theatrical. "I wonder how such abilities would fare in actual combat. Was there something specific you wanted, Diodora?" Rias asked, her patience visibly thinning. "Clarity," he replied smoothly. "The introduction of a demigod-turned-devil raises questions about our society's future. Some might see it as dilution of what makes devils unique." Percy bristled at the implied insult, but kept his expression neutral. "Change happens whether you welcome it or not." "Indeed it does." Diodora's eyes narrowed slightly, "which is why I believe a proper test is in order. I formally challenge you, Percy Jackson, to a rating game. Your abilities against mine. A proper devil tradition to welcome our new addition." The surrounding conversations quieted as others tuned into the confrontation. Rias stepped slightly forward, her posture protective though her expression remained diplomatic. "Percy has barely had time to adjust to devil society," she pointed out. "A rating game now would be premature." "Would it?" Diodora countered. "From what I observed, he seems quite comfortable with his abilities. Unless you're concerned about how he'll perform against a true devil." The challenge was skillfully laid. Refusing would suggest either weakness or fear, neither of which would help Percy's position in devil society. "I accept," Percy said before Rias could respond. "Name the time and conditions." Diodora's smile widened, satisfaction evident in his eyes. "1 week from today. Standard rating game rules. With one stipulation. No assistance from other members of either peerage. Just you and me, to truly measure your worth." "Agreed," Percy said, ignoring Rias's sharp look. "Then it's settled." Diodora turned to address the now substantial crowd that had gathered around them. "In 1 week, We'll see what a reincarnated demigod can truly offer our kind. As Diodora walked away, Rias pulled Percy aside, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. That was reckless. Diodora has participated in dozens of raiding games, you've never even seen one. I've been in plenty of fights, Percy countered. Against gods and titans, not just other devils. This isn't just about combat, she insisted. Raiding games have rules, strategies, political implications. Diodora is setting you up to fail. Percy met her gaze steadily. Then help me prove him wrong. The week that followed was the most intense training period of Percy's life, including the time he'd prepared to battle Kronos. Every waking hour was dedicated to understanding raiding game protocols, developing strategies, and pushing his powers to new limits. Rias proved to be both a demanding teacher and an insightful strategist. Raiding games take place in controlled dimensional spaces, she explained as they reviewed projections of previous matches. The environment can be manipulated to some extent, but not fundamentally altered. So I can't just flood the entire arena, Percy noted, half joking. Actually, you might be able to, Rias mused. Your connection to water is different from standard devil abilities. It's worth testing the boundaries. They discovered that while Percy couldn't generate unlimited quantities of water from nothing, his ability to draw moisture from the environment far exceeded normal parameters. In one training session, he managed to extract enough water from surrounding plant life to create a tidal wave that knocked Kiba clear across the practice field. Diodo. Ra specializes in magic that corrupts and weakens, Rias warned during a strategy session. He'll try to taint any water you control, or use spells that target your life force directly. So I keep moving, hit hard and fast. Percy summarized, recalling tactics that had served him well against more powerful opponents in the past. And be prepared for treachery, Akino added, her usual playful demeanor replaced by seriousness. Diodora has a reputation for bending rules when it suits him. The night before the match, Percy found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the Grimoire Gardens, event. Ally settling beside the largest fountain, its waters responding to his presence by rising in elegant patterns that reflected his troubled thoughts. Nervous, Rias's voice came from behind him. Percy didn't turn, thoughtful. This isn't my first high-stakes fight. She sat beside him on the fountain's edge. No, but it's your first as a devil. There's more riding on this than just victory or defeat. I know. Percy ran his fingers through the water, feeling the familiar connection that had defined his life. Diodora sees me as a threat to some kind of devil purity. Beating me proves his point. Losing to me undermines everything he stands for. Perceptive, Rias noted, sounding impressed. But there's something else you should know before tomorrow. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I've received intelligence that Diodora may have connections to your former world, specifically, to entities that might have orchestrated the breach you closed. Percy's head snapped up. What? How is that possible? The boundaries between pantheons have always been permeable for those with enough power and knowledge, Rias explained. Some devil houses have cultivated relationships with entities from other mythologies for centuries. It's generally discouraged but not explicitly forbidden. You think Diodora was involved with Erebos somehow? I think it's a possibility worth considering, she said cautiously. My sources indicate unusual magical signatures around Diodora's territory in the months preceding the breach. Nothing conclusive, but Percy felt cold anger settling into his bones. If Diodora had anything to do with the attack that had nearly destroyed Camp Half-Blood, that had torn Percy from his former life, this raiding game was about more than devil politics. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. Rias placed her hand over his where it rested on the fountain's edge. Be careful tomorrow, Percy. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment. Diodora will use any advantage, including provoking you into mistakes. Percy looked at their hands, then at Rias. In the short time he'd known her, she'd become more than just the devil who'd reincarnated him. She was his guide, his ally, and increasingly, someone he genuinely respected. I won't let you down, he promised. She smiled, a soft expression that contrasted with her usual confident demeanor. I know you won't. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion as an additional opponent. The raiding game arena materialized around Percy like a dream solidifying into reality. He stood in what appeared to be a coastal landscape, a rocky shoreline on one side, dense forest on the other, with a meadow of waist-high grass between them. The crimson sky of the underworld hung overhead, though here it seemed more vivid. Almost pulsing with energy. Interesting choice of environment, came Rias's voice through a magical communication link. Though she couldn't directly participate in the match, she could observe and advise from outside the dimensional space. Diodora requested this specific setting. Be wary, the water may be compromised. Percy approached the shoreline cautiously. The water looked normal enough. Waves lapping gently against the rocks. He extended his senses, feeling for the familiar connection. Something was wrong. The water responded to his call, but sluggishly, as if moving through molasses. And there was an underlying taint to it, a magical corruption that felt oily and wrong against his consciousness. You noticed my little adjustment, Diodora's voice. CE echoed across the arena as he appeared at the forest's edge. I thought it appropriate to level the playing field. After all, your water affinity gives you quite the advantage. Percy didn't respond, instead focusing on understanding exactly what had been done to the water. It wasn't completely corrupted, more like layered with a spell that interfered with his control. With concentration, he could still manipulate it, but with reduced efficiency. The match begins in 60 seconds, announced an official's voice from nowhere and everywhere. Standard rating game rules apply. Victory condition. S. Incapacitation of opponent or surrender. Diodora smiled across the distance separating them. Any last thoughts before I demonstrate the difference between a true devil and a reincarnated pretender? Percy settled into a combat stance, calling a small amount of water from the air around him rather than the tainted sea. Just one. You talk too much. The announcement of the match's start was rely audible over the crash of Diodora's opening attack, a barrage of energy bolts that tore across the meadow toward Percy. He rolled sideways, using the water he'd gathered to form a brief shield that absorbed the worst of the blast. Percy quickly assessed his options. The corrupted ocean was a last resort, but the air contained enough moisture for limited defense. The real question was how to get close enough to Diodora to utilize his physical combat advantages. Diodora maintained his position at the forest edge, sending wave after wave of magical attacks, dark energy that sizzled through the air and scorched the ground where Percy had been moments before. Running already, Diodora taunted. How disappointing. I expected more from the son of Poseidon. Percy ignored the baiting, focusing instead on gathering more moisture from the surrounding environment. The tall grass, he realized, contained significant water. With a grunt of effort, he extracted it all at once, causing the entire meadow to wither as a massive volume of water coalesced around him. Diodora's eyes widened slightly. Clearly, he hadn't anticipated this approach. Before he could adjust his strategy, Percy launched high MSELF forward on a pressurized stream of water, covering the distance between them in seconds. The devil barely managed to erect a magical barrier before Percy crashed into it, the water around him denning into ice like projectiles that hammered against Diodora's defenses. Impressive mobility, Diodora acknowledged, reinforcing his shield as it began to crack. But predictable. The ground Percy suddenly erupted with dark energy, forcing him to abandon his assault and leap backward. Pain lanced up his legs where the energy had made contact, a burning sensation that felt like acid eating into his essence rather than just physical damage. Devil magic targets the soul as much as the body, Diodora explained, now on the offensive as he advanced from the forest. Something your OD experience couldn't have prepared you for. Percy grimaced, pushing aside the pain through sheer determination. The water he'd gathered now circled him protectively, responding to his emotions by churning more violently. Maybe not, Percy admitted, but I'm a quick learner. He reached deep within himself, to that place where his demigod essence and devil nature had merged, and channeled both simultaneously. The water surrounding him suddenly blazed with crimson energy, no longer just water but something transformed, infused with devil power while maintaining its natural connection to Percy. Diodora's confident expression faltered as Percy launched his counterattack. Streams of energized water shot forward like living tentacles, too numerous to block completely. Where they made contact with Diodora's barriers, they didn't just strike. They clung, the devil energy within them working to disrupt Diodora's magic while the water itself sought entry through any gap. Impossible, Diodora hissed as his shield began to fail. You can't have mastered devil energy manipulation this quickly. Percy didn't waste breath responding. He pressed his advantage, closing the distance once more as Diodora was forced to retreat toward the forest. This time, when Percy struck, he combined physical combat with his water abilities. Riptide materialized in his hand. The sword had followed him even in to death and reincarnation, while water tendrils harassed Diodora from multiple angles. The devil was skilled, deflecting Percy's blade with conjured weapons of dark energy, but the constant assault from the water was taking its toll. A tendril managed to wrap around Diodora's ankle, instantly freezing into unbreakable ice. First blood to you, Diodora acknowledged, blasting the ice apart with a pulse of power. But this game is far from over. He retreated into the forest, forcing Percy to follow or lose contact. Among the trees, Diodora's knowledge of devil combat proved advantageous. He magical traps that Percy barely detected in time, used the terrain to break line of sight, and launched surprise attacks from unexpected angles. You're adapting well, Rias's voice came through their link, but be careful. Diodora is leading you deeper into the forest for a reason. Percy realized she was right. With each exchange, they moved further from the shoreline and the open meadow, into increasingly dense vegetation where Percy's mobility was restricted and his water supply limited to what he carried and could extract from plants. Time to change the game, Percy muttered to himself. Instead of continuing to follow Diodora's retreat, Percy planted his feet and closed his eyes, extending his senses outward, not just to the nearby trees and plants, but beyond, to the ocean he'd avoided using until now. The tainted water resisted his call, but Percy pushed harder, wrestling with the corruption Diodora had placed upon it. It was like trying to lift an immense weight. The magic fought him, trying to reverse his control. To corrupt him as it had corrupted the water. Percy felt sweat beading on his forehead as he fought the magical resistance. What are you doing? Diodora's voice came from somewhere ahead, a note of uncertainty creeping in. Percy didn't answer, pouring more of his combined power into breaking Diodora's hold on the ocean. There was a moment of suspension, like the pause at the top of a roller coaster, and then a tremendous snap as Percy's will overcame the corrupting spell. The ocean responded to its true master. A roaring wall of water crashed through the forest, uprooting trees and obliterating Diodora's carefully laid traps. Percy directed the deluge with precise control, ensuring it swept around him while driving relentlessly toward his opponent. Dora's shocked face was visible for just an instant before the wave engulfed him, carrying him through the forest and back into the meadow. Percy followed, riding atop the water like a surfer, riptide gleaming in his hand. When the water finally receded, Diodora lay gasping on the muddy ground of the former meadow, his elegant clothing ruined and his magical reserves clearly depleted from the effort of surviving the flood. Percy approached cautiously, water still swirling protectively around him. Yield, he suggested, Riptide's point hovering near Diodora's throat. The devil's eyes burned with humiliation and rage. Never. A true devil would rather die than surrender to a reincarnated pretender. Percy finished for him. Maybe it's time to reconsider what makes a true devil. Diodora's hand moved suddenly, not toward Percy but pressing against the ground. Dark energy pulsed outward, and Percy leapt backward, expecting another attack. Instead, the energy formed a communication circle. Activate contingency protocol. Diodora gasped into it. Authorization code. Erebos. Percy froze at the name. What did you just do? Diodora's smile returned, blood staining his teeth. Insurance policy. You're not the only one with connections to other pantheons, son of Poseidon. The dimensional space of the rating game suddenly shuddered, reality rippling as if under assault from outside. Alarms blared from nowhere. Percy. Rias's voice came urgently through their link. Something's interfering with the rating game dimension. Get out now. Before Percy could respond, a tear appeared. In the fabric of reality itself, a jagged black hole hovering in midair that radiated the same cosmic darkness Percy had faced at Camp Half-Blood. No, he whispered, recognition and horror washing over him. A figure stepped through the tear, humanoid but wrong somehow, its proportions slightly off, its skin the absolute black of deepest space. Where eyes should have been, there were only swirling vortices of darkness. "Hello, Godling," it said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Erebos sends his regards." "Match terminated," came the official's voice, panic evident even through the formal announcement. "Unauthorized interdimensional breach detected. Emergency extraction protocols activated." Percy felt the dimensional space beginning to dissolve around them as the R-aiding game administrators worked to shut down the compromised arena. But the entity from the tear moved with impossible speed, wrapping shadowy tendrils around both Percy and the now terrified Diodora. "Your petty games mean nothing," it hissed. "My master has unfinished business with the son of Poseidon, and with the fool who failed to deliver him as promised." Diodora's expression shifted from triumph to terror. "We had a deal. I helped you reach him. The deal has been renegotiated." The shadow creature's grip tightened, causing Diodora to scream in agony. Percy fought against the shadowy restraints, calling water to him with desperate intensity. The ocean responded once more, crashing against the entity, but the water simply passed through it as if it weren't physically present. "Your element has no power here, Godling," the creature mocked. "Erebos is primordial darkness, the void from which all creation emerged. Water, fire, earth, all are meaningless before their original nothing." Percy struggled harder, reaching for his devil powers instead. The crimson energy flared around him, burning away some of the shadow tendrils. The creature hissed in what might have been pain. "Devil essence," it acknowledged. "Interesting, but insufficient." The tear in reality was expanding, the rating game dimension crumbling around them. Percy knew that if the creature dragged him and Diodora through that portal, they would be beyond the reach of any help. In desperation, Percy reached for both sources of his power simultaneously, no longer trying to blend them but pushing each to its absolute limit. His demigod essence called to the water, not just from the ocean but from every possible source, the air, the plants, even his own body and Diodora's. His devil energy blazed outward, raw and unrefined but incredibly potent. The combination created something new, a storm of energized water that swirled around Percy with hurricane force, each droplet burning with crimson devil power. Shadow creature's grip weakened as the maelstrom intensified. "Impossible," it growled. "No hybrid being should wield such power." First rule of being a demigod, Percy gasped through the strain of maintaining the energy storm. "Nothing is impossible." With a final surge of effort, Percy directed the full force of his combined powers at the tear in reality. Water infused with devil energy crash ed against the cosmic breach like a battering ram, not trying to close it but to widen it, to destabilize it beyond the shadow creature's control. The strategy worked. The tear began to fluctuate wildly, its edges pulsing and distorting. The shadow creature's form wavered as its connection to Erebos' realm weakened. "This isn't over, son of Poseidon," it snarled, releasing its grip on both Percy and Diodora. "My master is patient. There are always more fools willing to bargain with primordial darkness." It retreated toward the destabilized tear, which collapsed in on itself with a sound like reality screaming. The last thing Percy saw before the rating game dimension finally dissolved was the creature's swirling eye voids fixed on him with unmistakable malice. Then everything went white. Percy awakened in a medical facility within the Grimoria state, Rias sitting vigilant beside his bed. Her expression brightened when she saw his eyes open. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days." Percy tried to sit up, wincing at the soreness that permeated every muscle. Diodora, the shadow creature. Diodora survived, though he's facing serious charges for collaborating with entities from another pantheon and endangering the rating game system. Rias's expression darkened. As for the creature, it vanished when the dimensional space collapsed. The breach was sealed. Percy slumped back against the pillows. "It was from Erebos, the same entity I fought at Camp Half-Blood. Somehow Diodora was working with them." "Yes, my brother's investigation has uncovered communications between Diodora and agents of Erebos dating back months. It seems he believed they would grant him power over darkness in exchange for helping them reach you." "Reach me? Why?" Rias hesitated. "The leading theory is that your sacrifice disrupted Erebos' plans in some fundamental way. You didn't just close the breach, you damaged something essential to the primordial darkness itself. They want retribution. or perhaps to understand how you did it. Percy absorbed this information silently. Even in death and reincarnation, it seemed his past followed him. Some things never changed, regardless of which pantheon you belong to. The rating game, he remembered suddenly. How did it end officially? To his surprise, Rias smiled. You were declared the winner. The BR. Each was deemed Diodora's responsibility, and your actions in containing it were viewed as extraordinary, especially for a newly reincarnated devil. Her smile widened. My brother may have influenced the ruling slightly. Politics, Percy said with a tired smile of his own. Always. Rias took his hand, her expression growing serious. But politics aside, what you did was remarkable, Percy. The way you combined your powers. The control you demonstrated, even experienced devils were impressed. I just did what I had to do. Same as always. And that's exactly why I reincarnated you. Her grip on his hand tightened slightly. Your instincts, your determination, they're what make you valuable, not just your power. Percy looked at their joined hands, then up at Rias. In that moment, he saw beyond the devil aristocrat, beyond the peerage leader, to the person beneath, someone who recognized worth beyond bloodlines and tradition, who valued will and heart alongside power. Thank you, he said simply. For the second chance. For believing in me. Always, she replied, echoing his earlier thought. Later, when Percy was strong enough to walk, Rias took him to one of the estate's balconies overlooking the underworld landscape. The crimson sky stretched endlessly above them, somehow less alien than it had seemed when he first arrived. What happens now? Percy asked as they stood side by side at the stone railing. Now, Rias said thoughtfully, we prepare. Erebos won't be deterred so easily, and your victory over Diodora has put you firmly in the spotlight of Devil Society. Some will seek your friendship, others your destruction. Nothing new there, Percy observed dryly. Rias smiled. Indeed, but you won't face it alone. She turned to face him fully. My peerage is my family, Percy. And now that includes you. Percy looked out over the strange landscape that was now his home. He thought of Camp Half-Blood, of his mother, of the life he'd left behind. The grief was still there. But alongside it was something new, possibility. Family, he repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. From the shadows of a distant tower, a figure watched them, tall, regal, with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. Sears X Lucifer observed his sister and her newest peerage member with thoughtful interest. A demigod turned devil who can fight entities from beyond our realm. Came a voice beside him as Ajuka Beelzebub materialized from a transportation circle. Your sister has always had a talent for finding unusual pieces. More than unusual, Sears X replied. Did you analyze the energy signatures from the rating game? Ajuka nodded, his expression serious. The combination of demigod essence and devil power created something our instruments could barely measure. If he learns to control it fully, he could change everything, Sears X finished. For better or worse. And the breach, the entity from Erebos' realm. Sears X turned from the window. Alert the other Satans. Increase dimensional boundary monitoring. If primordial entities from other pantheons are taking an interest in our world, we need to be prepared. And Percy Jackson. Sears X cast one last glance at the balcony where Percy and Rias stood. For now, we watch. And wait. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. Sea of Flames. 6 months passed like wait. Through cupped hands. Impossible to hold on to completely, yet leaving its mark all the same. Percy Jackson stood at the boundaries of his newly granted territory, a modest estate nestled in a valley. Between two mountains in the eastern reaches of Grimoire lands. The crimson sky of the underworld had become familiar now, almost comforting in its alien consistency. You're brooding again, called a familiar voice. Percy turned to see Rias approaching, her crimson hair caught in the perpetual twilight breeze. These past months, their relationship had evolved from cautious alliance to genuine connection. Her presence brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the underworld. Thinking, not brooding, Percy corrected with a half-smile. There's a difference, is there? Rias joined him at the carved stone marker that designated the beginning of his territory. Could have fooled me with that expression. Percy shrugged, just wondering what my dad would think. Son of Poseidon. Now a devil landowner in the underworld. Pretty sure that wasn't covered in the demigod orientation packet. Rias laughed, the sound bright against the muted landscape. I imagine not. Though from what you've told me, gods are nothing if not adaptable. Perhaps he would be proud. The mention of his father brought the familiar twist of homesickness, duller now than in those first disorienting weeks. But never completely absent. Percy had adapted to his new existence with the same resilience that had carried him through Titan wars and giant battles, but some nights he still dreamed of salt air and the endless blue of the mortal world's oceans. Maybe, Percy conceded. Anyway, I wasn't expecting you today. Thought you had meetings with the Archduke. Postponed. Rias waved dismissively. Apparently there's been unusual activity along the dimensional boundaries again. The higher-ups are in emergency sessions. Percy tensed. Since the incident with Diodora and the shadow creature 6 months ago, the underworld had experienced periodic disturbances, tremors in reality that the Satans attributed to increased interest from other pantheons. Nothing had broken through, but ch incident left Percy with the unsettling certainty that someone, or something, was searching for him. Any connection to Erebos this time? He asked. Unknown, Rias replied, her expression growing serious. But that's not why I came. I wanted to show you something. She produced a small crystal sphere from her pocket, its surface clouded with swirling mist. At her touch, the mist cleared, revealing a three-dimensional image of what appeared to be underwater ruins. One of our surveillance familiars discovered this yesterday, she explained. It's in the Sea of Tears, the deepest ocean in the underworld. Percy studied the image with growing interest. The ruins were unmistakably Greek in design, columns and pediments that reminded him of Poseidon's underwater palace, though these were ancient and crumbling. That shouldn't be here, he said, taking the crystal for a closer look. Exactly. No record exists of Greek-style architecture anywhere in the underworld, certainly not beneath the Sea of Tears. It's as if it appeared overnight. Percy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mild breeze. A message, or a trap, possibly both. Rias reclaimed the crystal, their fingers brushing momentarily. My brother has ordered it quarantined until we can determine its origin. No one is to approach without explicit authorization. But you're telling me anyway, Percy noted with a knowing look. A smile tugged at Rias's lips. Consider it information shared between allies. What you choose to do with it is, of course, entirely your decision. The unspoken understanding passed between them. In the 6 months since Percy's victory over Diodora, his position in Devil's society had grown increasingly complex. Officially, he remained part of Rias's peerage, but his unique status had earned him unprecedented autonomy. The territory he now controlled, modest by Devil standards, was itself an acknowledgement of his growing influence. When do you have to return to the main estate? Percy asked, already calculating possibilities. Not until tomorrow morning. Searsex expects me to attend the council session then. Rias raised an eyebrow. Why do you ask? Just wondering if you'd like a swimming lesson. Her expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to exasperation. Percy, if you're suggesting what I think you are, a quick reconnaissance, he clarified. In and out, just to see what we're dealing with. Against direct orders from a Satan. Not against. More. Adjacent to. Percy grinned, the expression reminiscent of his younger self planning some reckless adventure. Besides, who better to investigate underwater ruins than someone who can breathe underwater and control the currents? Rias sighed, but Percy could see the gleam of interest in her eyes. Despite her position as heir to House Grimoire, Rias had never been one to blindly follow convention. If we're discovered, she began. We'll say I kidnapped you, Percy suggested helpfully. In trustworthy former demigod, still adjusting to proper Devil protocol. That earned him a light punch to the shoulder. As if anyone would believe that. Fine, but we maintain distance unless absolutely certain it's safe. The last thing we need is another interdimensional incident. Percy offered his hand with mock formality. Deal. Rias took it, her grip firm and warm. Deal. But Percy, her expression sobered. If this is connected to your past, we need to be prepared for complications. The political situation is delicate right now. He nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. The fallout from Diodora's scheme had increased tensions between traditional Devil factions and those who, like Rias and her brother, advocated for more progressive policies. Percy's very existence had become a flashpoint in these debates. Understood. Reconnaissance only. We see what's there, then report through proper channels. Rias studied him for a moment, then nodded. Meet me at the Eastern Transportation Circle in an hour. Bring whatever you might need for deep water exploration. As she turned to leave, Percy called after her, Hey, Rias. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Thanks for trusting me with this. A smile softened her features. I've trusted you with far more, Percy Jackson. The words carried weight beyond their immediate context, and Percy felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest. Their relationship had evolved in ways neither had anticipated when she first reincarnated him. What had begun as pragmatic alliance had deepened into something neither of them had fully defined but both increasingly relied upon. As Rias vanished into a transportation circle, Percy turned his attention back to his territory. The modest manor house, the surrounding forests and meadows, the small lake he'd created himself by drawing water from deep underground, all of it represented his new life, his adaptation to an existence he'd never sought but now embraced. With a thought, he called water from the lake, a stream of it rising into the air and flowing toward him like a living ribbon. The water responded more fluidly now than it had 6 months ago, his control refined through constant practice. As it reached him, Percy infused the water with his devil energy, causing it to glow with that now familiar crimson light. The merged powers had become second nature, no longer separate abilities but a single, unified force that responded to his will with increasing precision. Percy shaped the energized water into complex forms, first a trident, then a scaled replica of his manor house, and finally a perfect miniature of Rias herself, rendered in such detail that individual strands of her hair were visible in the crystalline sculpture. Percy studied the water effigy with a mixture of pride and something deeper, more complex. Then, with a sigh, he released his control, allowing the water to splash harmlessly to the ground and seep back toward the lake. Time to prep a for underwater exploration, and whatever complications awaited in the mysterious ruins. The Sea of Tears lived up to its ominous name. Unlike the vibrant blues of Earth's oceans, its waters were a deep, almost purple hue, with currents that seemed to flow in patterns defying normal hydrology. Rias and Percy stood on a secluded stretch of shoreline, the nearest devil settlement miles away across barren volcanic plains. The quarantine perimeter begins 500 meters offshore, Rias explained, consulting a magical map projected from another crystal. No physical barriers, but detectio. End spells will alert the authorities if anyone crosses. Percy knelt, touching the water's surface. Unlike oceans in the mortal world, this one felt different against his consciousness. There was a subtle resistance when he reached out with his senses, as if the water itself wasn't quite sure what to make of him. I can handle the detection spells, he said after a moment. Water can disrupt the magical signatures if I concentrate. Rias looked skeptical. These are high-level boundary spells cast by the Satan's personal mages. And I'm the son of the sea god, now with bonus devil powers. Percy countered with a confidence that wasn't entirely bravado. Over the past months, he'd discovered that his unique combination of abilities granted him unexpected advantages against conventional devil magic. Very well. Rias began removing her outer garments, revealing a simple black swimsuit beneath. She caught Percy's surprised look and smiled. What, did you think I'd wade into the Sea of Tears in full formal attire? Percy cleared his throat, suddenly finding the horizon fascinating. No, just planning ahead. Good thinking. Her amused laugh did nothing to cool the heat rising in his face. Percy stripped down to the swim shorts he'd worn underneath his clothes, acutely aware of Rias watching him with undisguised appreciation. Their relationship had evolved in many ways, but physical intimacy remained largely unexplored territory, a line neither had quite been ready to cross, despite growing attraction. The political implications alone made things complicated, never mind the cultural differences between a former demigod and a high-born devil. Ready? Percy asked, eager to focus on the task at hand. Rias nodded, her expression turning serious. Lead the way, son of Poseidon. Percy waded into the water, feeling its strange properties swirl around his legs. At his silent command, a bubble of air formed around Rias as she followed him in. This will let you breathe and communicate, he explained. And I'll handle the pressure as we descend. Just stay close. Not a problem, she replied, her voice only slightly distorted by the bubble's barrier. They swam out past the shallows, Percy propelling them effortlessly through the water while maintaining Rias's air supply. As they approached the quarantine perimeter, he extended his senses, feeling for the magical boundary. There, he murmured, detecting the faint web of spells stretching from the seabed to the surface. Complex work, multiple layers. Percy concentrated, commanding the water molecules to change IR arrangement subtly around the detection spells. It was delicate work, not disrupting the magic enough to trigger alarms, but creating just enough interference to slip through unnoticed. Almost, he muttered, feeling sweat bead on his forehead despite being underwater. Got it. A narrow corridor opened in the detection field, the water behaving according to Percy's will rather than the imposed magic. He guided Rias through quickly, sealing the gap behind them. Impressive, she acknowledged, watching the magical barrier reform. I've never seen anyone manipulate spell matrices through an environmental medium like that. Water wants to flow, Percy explained with a shrug. Magic tries to create structure. Sometimes it's just about finding the path of least resistance. They descended deeper, the strange purple waters growing darker around them. Percy created a soft light within Rias's air bubble and formed a similar glow around himself. The pressure increased dramatically as they dropped toward the seabed, but Percy adjusted the water density around them to compensate. There, Rias pointed after they'd been descending for nearly 10 minutes. Below them, emerging from the gloom, stood the ruins they'd seen in the crystal. Up close, they were even more impressive, a complex of buildings that would have rivaled the grandest temples of ancient Greece. Massive columns, many still intact, supported pediments carved with scenes Percy recognized immediately from his own mythology. The Titanomachy, he said, studying one particularly detailed relief showing gods battling giants. The war between the Olympians and the Titans. In the underworld, Rias mused, her voice hushed with wonder. How is this possible? Percy guided them lower, circling the perimeter of the ruins. Unlike natural underwater structures, there was no marine growth, no evidence of erosion from the currents. Everything looked pristine despite its ancient design, as if it had been built yesterday by craftsmen recreating an ancient style. It's not just recent, Percy realized aloud. It's new, made to look ancient. A stage set, Rias agreed. But for what purpose? As they approached the Centra L building, a perfect replica of a Greek temple, Percy felt something shift in the water around them. A subtle current, moving against the natural flow, circling the temple like a sentinel. Something's here, he warned, halting their advance. Something conscious. The current intensified, gathering speed and force until it materialized into a visible whirlpool before the temple's entrance. Water coalesced into a humanoid shape, tall, regal, with features that shifted like the sea itself. Where eyes should have been, there were only swirling pools of deepest blue. Son of Poseidon, the figure's voice resonated through the water itself, bypassing ears to vibrate directly against consciousness. Or should I say, former son of Poseidon. Percy moved protectively in front of Rias, though the GE stir was largely symbolic underwater where he controlled every aspect of their environment. Who are you? He demanded, though a sinking feeling told him he already knew. The figure's liquid face met a smile that never reached those whirlpool eyes. Has my nephew erased me so thoroughly from his teachings? I am Oceanus, Titan of the seas. The original master of waters, long before Poseidon usurped my domain. Percy had heard the name, of course. Oceanus had remained neutral during the Second Titan War, one of the few not to join Kronos' rebellion. His absence had been a crucial factor in the Olympians' victory. You're a long way from home, Percy observed, mind racing. Different pantheon, different rules. Am I? Oceanus gestured expansively at the temple behind him. The sea recognizes its true lord regardless of arbitrary pantheon boundaries. Water is water, whether in your former world or this devil realm. What do you want? Rias spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her posture. Oceanus's watery gaze shifted to her. Ah, the devil princess who collected my nephew's cast-off. How enterprising of you. Percy felt anger flare at the dismissive tone. Answer her question. What I want, Oceanus said, returning his attention to Percy, is to correct an abomination. A son of the sea, perverted by devil essence. It's unnatural, an insult to the very elements you once claimed kinship with. Says the Titan building fake temples in someone else's underworld, Percy countered. Not exactly staying in your lane either. Oceanus's form rippled with what might have been anger. Insolent as ever. Your father's influence, no doubt. The water around them grew noticeably colder. I watched you, Perseus Jackson. Your battles, your growth, your sacrifice. So much potential. Wasted now. Corrupted by this. He gestured at Percy's body where crimson devil energy swirled beneath the skin. I didn't exactly have a choice in the matter, Percy said. And frankly, I'm doing fine. Are you? The Titan drifted closer. Do you think Poseidon would recognize what you've become? Do you think he would claim you now, your blood diluted with devil essence? The words struck closer to home than Percy wanted to admit. It was a question he'd asked himself many times during sleepless nights, whether his transformation had severed his connection to his father permanently. You know nothing about Percy, Rias interjected, anger evident in her voice. His essence isn't diluted, it's evolved. Expanded. Oceanus laughed, the sound causing unsettling vibrations through the water. The devil defends her investment. How touching. His expression hardened. But this is between the son of Poseidon and the true lord of seas. This transformation cannot stand. If you've come to fight, Percy said, gathering his power, you picked the wrong place. This isn't your domain, isn't it? Oceanus raised his arms, and the water around them responded instantly, no. Chi just moving but fundamentally changing, taking on properties Percy had never encountered before. The purple hue deepened to almost black, and Percy felt his connection to it weakening rapidly. This was no ordinary control of water. Oceanus was altering its very nature, transforming it into something ancient and primordial. The Sea of Tears, the Titan intoned, now returns to its original state. The primeval waters that existed before pantheons were divided. Before your father was even conceived. Percy struggled to maintain Rias's air bubble as the transformed water fought against his will. This was unlike anything he'd encountered, like trying to control liquid that simultaneously was and wasn't water. Percy, Rias warned, gathering her own destructive magic. Crimson energy crackled around her hands, illuminating the darkening water. We need to leave, Percy acknowledged, already maneuvering them backward. This isn't a fight we're prepared for. Oceanus made no move to stop their retreat, his watery form rippling with amusement. Flee if you must, but know this, Perseus Jackson, your abomination will be cleansed. The natural order will be restored. His voice followed them as they ascended rapidly toward the surface. And when you're ready to reclaim your true heritage, I will be waiting. Only when they broke the surface, gasping in the crimson-tinged air of the underworld, did Percy feel his full control return. The water below them churned ominously, but remained confined to the quarantined area. That, Rias said as they waded onto shore, was not reconnaissance. It was first contact with a hostile entity from another pantheon. Percy nodded grimly, wringing water from his hair. Oceanus, Titan of the seas, not exactly known for warmth and hospitality. He seemed particularly fixated on your transformation. Rias studied him with concern. His words bothered you. Percy wanted to deny it, but lying to Rias had become increasingly difficult. They hit a nerve, he admitted. I've wondered the same thing myself. Whether my father would still recognize me, whether I've become something he would reject. Rias approached, placing a hand on his cheek. Percy, from everything you've told me about Poseidon, he valued courage and heart above all else. Those haven't changed. Her eyes held his. If anything, they've grown stronger. The simple certainty and her voice eased something tight in Percy's chest. He covered her hand with his own. Thanks. But Oceanus being here is serious trouble. Titans don't just pop by for casual visits. Agreed. We need to report this immediately. Rias glanced back at the churning sea. Though I'd prefer not to explain exactly how we discovered it. Percy managed a smile. Creative reporting. I'm rubbing off on you. Don't push your luck, she warned. Though her eyes sparkled with shared conspiracy. But we should move quickly. Whatever Oceanus is planning, I doubt he's working alone. They were right to be concerned. Within days of their discovery, reports began flooding in from across the underworld, water sources behaving strangely, rivers flowing backward, wells suddenly turning brackish and undrinkable. Percy stood in Searsex's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing affected areas throughout Devil territories. The meeting had been called urgently after yet another water source, T.'s time a major reservoir supplying several noble houses, had suddenly transformed into the same black, primordial liquid they'd encountered at the ruins. It's systematic, Percy explained, pointing to the pattern of incidents. He's targeting major water sources first, then working inward. Classic siege tactics. Control the resources, then expand territory. Searsex studied the display with the calculating gaze of a leader who had faced numerous crises. And you're certain this titan has no historical presence in our realm? Positive, Rias affirmed. Oceanus belongs exclusively to the Greek pantheon. His appearance here represents an unprecedented breach of dimensional boundaries. Yet not technically an invasion, noted Ajuka Beelzebub, who stood examining a sample of the transformed water. Fascinating properties. It's water, but older somehow. More fundamental. He called it primeval water, Percy said. From before the division of pantheons. A theological claim with practical implications, Searsex mused. If water itself recognizes his authority regardless of dimensional boundaries, then we have a serious problem, finished Graphia, Searsex's wife and queen. Especially given recent developments with the old Satan faction. Percy frowned. What developments? Searsex and Rias exchanged a look that spoke volumes about political complications Percy wasn't fully privy to. There have been increased activities among Devil purists, Rias explained carefully. Those who oppose my brother's leadership and wish to return to older, more traditional governance. They've been unusually quiet these past weeks, Searsex added. Now we may understand why. An alliance with an entity powerful enough to challenge us directly would align with their goals. Percy pieced it together quickly. Oceanus provides them with power over basic resources, they provide him with insider knowledge and political disruption. A concerning hypothesis, Ajuka agreed. But how old they have even contacted a titan from another pantheon. All eyes turned to Percy, who shifted uncomfortably. After what happened with Diodora and Erebos, word probably spread that dimensional breaches were possible. Someone got creative, or desperate, Searsex corrected. The old Satan faction has lost significant influence since their failed coup attempts. An outside power might reprise their last hope of regaining relevance. Graphia approached the holographic display, enlarging the map of affected territories. The pattern suggests they'll strike here next. She indicated a region Percy recognized immediately. That's Grimoire land, he said, tension creeping into his voice. Near Rias's primary estate, and conveniently far from where I'm supposed to be tomorrow, Rias added, her expression hardening. The Eastern Diplomatic Summit can't be postponed again without serious repercussions. A deliberate timing, Searsex agreed grimly. They're trying to separate us, dilute our response capability. Percy studied the map. Strategic instincts honed through years of warfare kicking in. I can defend the Grimoire water sources. If Oceanus is involved personally, I'm the best counter you have. Against a titan, Ajuka raised an eyebrow. Even with your unique abilities, that's ambitious. I've faced worse odds, Percy said simply. Searsex considered him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Coordinate with Graphia for defensive resources. Rias must attend the summit. The political situation is too delicate to show any weakness now. Rias looked like she wanted to protest but held her tongue. The necessities of Devil politics had become a constant balancing act for both of them. Personal desires weighed against societal expectations and responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, Percy and Rias found a moment of privacy in an antechamber off the main hall. I don't like this separation, she admitted. It feels like playing into their hands. Maybe. Percy agreed, but sometimes the best way through a trap is straight ahead with eyes open. Rias studied him, concern evident in her gaze. Oceanus clearly has a personal interest in you. This could be more dangerous than you're admitting. Probably, Percy acknowledged with a half smile. But I'm not exactly the same person who fought in the Titan War anymore. He might be surprised at what he's up against now. Rias stepped closer, her hand coming to rest against his chest where devil energy pulsed beneath his skin. Just be careful. Titans have their own rules, their own magic. Don't underestimate him because you faced his kind before. I won't, Percy promised, covering her hand with his own. The gesture had become familiar between them, this connection, this wordless acknowledgement of what neither had fully articulated. I should prepare for the summit, Rias said, though she made no move to step away. You should, Percy agreed, equally stationary. The moment stretched between them, tension of an entirely different sort than what had filled the war room. Then, with a decisiveness characteristic of her nature, Rias closed the remaining distance between them. The kiss was neither tentative nor overwhelming, just a perfect meeting of equals, of two people who had come to rely on each other in ways neither had anticipated. Percy's arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, the embrace confirming what months of growing closeness had built toward. When they finally separated, Rias's eyes held a mixture of affection and determination. That was overdue, she observed. Extremely, Percy agreed, unable to suppress his smile. Maybe we should be separated by crisis more often. She laughed, the sound bright even in the somber atmosphere of war preparations. Let's not make a habit of it. Her expression sobered. When this is over, we should talk about us. What this means, politically, personally, both, Percy asked, recognizing the complexity of their situation. All of it, she confirmed. But first, we each have a job to do. Percy nodded, reluctantly releasing her. Go dazzle the diplomats. I'll keep your house's water supply demon-free. See that you do. She pressed one more quick kiss to his lips before stepping back. My brother will provide whatever resources you need. Don't hesitate to use them. As Rias departed for her preparations, Percy turned back to the war room's tactical displays. The map of water sources throughout Grimoire territory glowed ominously, each one a potential target for Oceanus and whatever devil collaborators he'd found. Defending them all would be impossible. He would need to anticipate the Titan's next move, prepare a response that didn't just react but countered decisively. And he would need to do it all in unfamiliar territory, against an enemy who represented the original mastery of his own element. Percy smiled grimly. Just another Tuesday, really. The attack came at dawn, exactly as Percy had predicted. Not at the main reservoir as Graphia had suggested, but at the underground aquifer that fed the Grimoire estate's extensive gardens and water features, less tactically obvious, but symbolically powerful and practically devastating if compromised. Percy felt it begin, a subtle shift in the water pressure beneath the estate, a foreign consciousness seeping into the natural flow. He'd been awake all night, senses extended throughout the water systems, waiting for precisely this moment. They're here, he announced to the command center he'd established in the estate's eastern wing. A dozen high-level devils from Searsex's personal guard snapped to attention. Primary incursion at the main aquifer, just as we discussed. Secondary targets likely to follow within minutes. The guard captain, a stern-faced devil named Lucretia, nodded sharply. Defensive teams in position, countermeasures active. Percy closed his eyes, focusing his consciousness down through layers of rock and soil to where the aquifer spread like a vast underground lake. The intrusion was unmistakable now, that same primordial water he'd encountered in the Sea of Tears, seeping into the pure sources of the Grimoire lands. But this time, Percy was prepared. Over the past 2 days, he'd worked with Ajuka to develop a counter to Oceanus's transformation technique, a way to preserve water's essential nature against the Titan's corruption. Percy activated the spell matrices they'd positioned throughout the aquifer system. Devil magic combined with his own innate connection to water created a barrier, not physical but conceptual, reinforcing this water's identity as part of the underworld rather than the primeval sea Oceanus claimed dominion over. Through his water sense, Percy felt the Titan's surprise, as the corruption met unexpected resistance. But surprise quickly turned to determination as the pressure intensified. He's pushing harder, Percy reported, sweat beading on his forehead from the mental strain. And he's not alone. I sense devil energy signatures. At least a dozen, maybe more. The old Satan faction, Lucretia confirmed, receiving reports through a magical communication circle. They've been detected breaching the outer perimeter wards. Percy had expected this, a two-pronged attack, with Oceanus targeting the water while his devil allies created a diversion above ground. What he hadn't anticipated was the sheer power behind the Titan's assault. The protective matrices were already beginning to buckle under the pressure. I need to get down there, Percy decided. His spells aren't enough. He's too strong to counter remotely. Lucretia looked skeptical. You want to physically confront a Titan? Underground. In the water, Percy corrected. My domain as much as his. Maybe more so here in the underworld. He didn't wait for her approval, already moving toward the access point they'd prepared, a shaft that led directly down to the aquifer's main chamber. Percy dove in headfirst, the water welcoming him instantly. As he descended through the shaft, Percy felt the conflict intensify. The deeper sections of the aquifer were already transforming, the clear weight of the underworld giving way to that ancient, primordial liquid that seemed to reject his control. At the bottom of the shaft, the aquifer opened into a vast underground cavern, its ceiling support by natural rock formations that resembled columns. And there, in the center of the cavern, stood Oceanus, no longer a being of water but physically manifest, his form solidified into something more assembling the Titans Percy had faced years ago. The Devil Child arrives, Oceanus observed, his voice resonating through the water. I was beginning to think you would hide behind your spells and barriers. Just giving you a chance to reconsider, Percy replied, hovering in the water across from the Titan. This won't end well for you, Oceanus. The Titan laughed, the sound causing ripples throughout the cavern. Such confidence. You've grown arrogant in this realm, nephew. Do you forget who I am? What I represent? I remember exactly who you are, Percy said. The Titan who sat out the last war. Who watched from the sidelines while Kronos fell. Not exactly an impressive resume. Anger flashed across Oceanus's ancient features. I chose neutrality because the conflict was beneath me. Olympians, Titans, squabbling children compared to the primordial powers. And yet here you are, Percy observed, making deals with devil rebels for, what, exactly? A foothold in someone else's pantheon. For restoration, Oceanus surged forward, the water around him darkening. The natural order perverted by your existence. Water and devil essence were never meant to combine, it violates the fundamental separation of elements. Percy recognized the fanaticism in the Titan's voice, the same religious certainty he'd heard from Kronos' followers. Oceanus didn't just want to defeat him, he wanted to erase what Percy represented. You're too late, Percy said, gathering his power. The combination's already happened, and you know what? It works pretty well. To demonstrate, Percy called on both aspects of his nature simultaneously. Water swirled around him, drawing from the uncorrupted portions of the aquifer, while devil energy blazed beneath his skin. When the two merged, the result was spectacular. Water that glowed with crimson energy, moving with a precision and purpose that defied normal physics. Oceanus recoiled slightly, genuine surprise registering on his face. Impossible. No. Hybrid beings should command such control. First time for everything, Percy replied, then attacked. The battle that followed was unlike anything Percy had experienced before. Both combatants wielded water as their primary weapon, but in fundamentally different ways. Oceanus commanded it with the ancient authority of a primordial being. Water obeyed him because it was its nature to do so, because he represented its original state. Percy, by contrast, fought with a combination of inherited power and earned skill. His connection to water came from his father, but the precision with which he wielded it, and the devil energy that now infused it, was entirely his own. They clashed in the center of the cavern, watery constructs smashing against each other with force that sent shockwaves through the surrounding rock. Percy formed weapons of hardened water, tridents, swords, shields, while Oceanus manipulated the water's very nature, turning sections of the aquifer into acid or ice or steam as the battle demanded. You fight well for an abomination, Oceanus acknowledged after Percy narrowly avoided being crushed by a massive water hammer. Your father trained you adequately. He didn't train me at all, actually, Percy countered, launching a barrage of ice spears. I figured it out as I went. Improvisation. Not really a Titan's strong suit, is it? The taunt hit its mark. Oceanus roared in frustration, abandoning subtlety for raw power. A tidal wave of primordial water surged toward Percy, threatening to overwhelm his defenses through sheer volume. But instead of resisting directly, Percy did something unexpected. He accepted the water, allowed it to engulf him completely. Then, from within the Titan's own attack, he exerted his will not on the water itself but on the devil energy within his own body. The crimson power exploded outward, not fighting the primordial water but transforming it, infusing it with devil essence at the molecular level. The effect spread like a shockwave, converting Oceanus's weapon into something neither fully water nor fully devil magic, but a new substance that responded to Percy's will. "What have you done?" Oceanus bellowed as his attack turned against him, the transformed water wrapping around him like chains. "Adaptation," Percy explained, struggling to maintain control of the massive volume of water. "Something you might want to try sometime." Above them, the cavern shook with distant explosions. The battle on the surface was clearly intensifying, but Percy couldn't spare attention for it now. Oceanus was straining against the watery bonds, his ancient power still formidable despite the setback. "You think this display impresses me?" the Titan snarled. "I have existed since before your father drew his first breath. This devil mag, I see as a temporary aberration in the cosmic order." "Maybe," Percy acknowledged, tightening his control. "But right now, it's kicking your ancient butt." He twisted his hands in a complex gesture, one that Rias had taught him for manipulating devil energy at its most fundamental level. The water chains binding Oceanus began to glow brighter, the crimson energy within them intensifying until it seemed to burn through the water itself. Oceanus howled. Not in pain, Percy realized, but in outrage. The Titan's form began to dissolve, returning to its more fluid state as he abandoned physical manifestation for a less vulnerable form. "Clever child," Oceanus's voice echoed as his body became one with the water. "But your victory is hollow. Above, my allies advance. Your devil protectors fall. And the water around them pulsed ominously. "This is merely our opening move." Before Percy could respond, the cavern shuddered more violently than before. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, and Percy sensed a massive buildup of magical energy directly above them. "They're going to collapse the entire aquifer," he realized aloud. "Sacrifice their own allies to bury us both." Oceanus's laughter rounded him as the Titan's consciousness spread throughout the water. "Farewell, nephew. When next we meet, it will be on terms far less favorable to you." The Titan's presence vanished, retreating rough channels in the rock that Percy hadn't even detected. Left alone in the destabilizing cavern, Percy had seconds to make a decision: pursue Oceanus or save the estate above. No real choice at all. Percy closed his eyes, extending his senses upward through the rock. The devils on the surface were indeed in trouble. He could feel the battle raging directly above the aquifer, could sense the explosive magic being channeled downward to trigger a catastrophic collapse. With a surge of will, Percy gathered all the water in the cavern, including the portions Oceanus had transformed. Instead of fighting their primordial nature, he worked with it, using their more fundamental properties to strengthen his control. The water rose up like a massive column, pressing against the cavern ceiling just as the explosive magic detonated. Rock and earth crashed downward, but met Percy's water column with equal force. For a moment, the two powers, devil explosives and Percy's water control, balanced perfectly. Then, with a final effort that sent pain lancing through his skull, Percy pushed. The water column surged upward through the collapsing rock, creating channels where there had been solid stone, diverting the force of the explosion outward rather than down. Percy rode the column upward, using the water to carry him through the debris field that had once been the access shaft. He erupted onto the surface in the midst of chaos. The Grimoire Estate's eastern gardens had become a battlefield, craters where explosions had torn up the manicured lawns, devil guards engaged in magical combat with bed figures Percy recognized as old Satan faction extremists. His dramatic arrival momentarily paused the fighting, all eyes turning to the figure emerging from the earth on a column of glowing water. "The abomination survives," cried one of the robed devils, his face contorted with religious fervor. "The water devil lives." Percy didn't waste time with words. The water column collapsed outward, forming a wave that swept across the battlefield. But unlike a natural wave that would strike friend and foe alike, this one moved with precision, flowing around Grimoire guards while crashing into the rebels with targeted force. The rebels fought back with impressive coordination, their magic clearly enhanced beyond normal devil capabilities. Percy recognized the signature, water-based power, obvious. Lee granted by Oceanus as payment for their alliance. Fall back to defensive positions. Lucretia commanded the guards, recognizing they were outmatched in raw power. No, Percy countermanded, stepping forward. Hold your ground. They're not as strong as they appear. To demonstrate, he focused on one of the rebels who was generating water whips similar to Percy's own techniques. With a gesture, Percy asserted control over the water the rebel was manipulating, and met almost no resistance. The rebel's eyes widened in shock as his weapons turned against him. Oceanus gave you borrowed power, Percy called out to the rebels. But he's gone now, and his gifts are returning to their source. It wasn't entirely true. Oceanus had retreated, not departed completely, but the psychological impact was immediate. Several rebels tried to use their water abilities and found them significantly weakened without the Titan's direct presence. The tide of battle shifted quickly after that. Without their supernatural advantage, the old Satan faction fighters were skilled but outnumbered. Some fled through transportation circles, while others fought with increasing desperation. Percy moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Water responding to his slightest gesture, devil energy flaring to counter magical attacks. His months of training with Rias's peerage had honed his combat instincts for devil warfare. While his years as a demigod provided the foundation of experience that kept him adaptive and unpredictable. Within 20 minutes, the battle was effectively over. The remaining rebels surrendered or were captured. The Grimoire estate secured if somewhat worse for wear. Percy stood amid the wreckage of the gardens, exhaustion finally catching up to him as the adrenaline faded. That, Lucretia said as she approached, looking somewhat singed but otherwise intact, was impressive. Percy managed a tired smile. Just doing my job, keeping the house water demon free, as promised. Lord Searsex will want a full report, she noted, surveying the damage. Especially regarding Oceanus's retreat. Where did the Titan go? I don't know, Percy admitted. He dissolved into the water network, could be anywhere by now. But he was weakened. The fight took more out of him than he expected. Lucretia nodded thoughtfully. The old Satan faction won't be pleased. Failed operations tend to result in internal adjustments. Let them fight among themselves, Percy said. Right now, I'm more concerned about what Oceanus meant by opening move. This wasn't a single attack, it's the start of something bigger. Agreed. Lucretia activated a communication circle. I'll inform Lord Searsex immediately. The diplomatic summit will need to be concluded quickly in light of these developments. At the mention of the summit, Percy's thoughts turned to Rias. Has there been any word from the Eastern Territories? Any similar attacks there? Communications have been spotty, but no reports of major incidents, Lucretia replied. Lady Rias appears to be secure. Percy nodded, relief washing through him. Good. That's good. The knowing look Lucretia gave him suggested his concern hadn't been particularly subtle. But she made no comment. Instead, she gestured toward the estate. You should rest while you can. If this truly is just the beginning, we'll need you at full strength for what comes next. Percy couldn't argue with that logic. As he made his way toward the manor house, stepping carefully around debris and water-filled craters, he reflected on the battle. Oceanus was foe. RMI dabble. As expected of a Titan, but not unbeatable. The real question was what larger game the Titan was playing, and how the old Satan faction fit into his plans. One thing was certain, whatever came next would make today's battle look like a warm-up exercise. The Eastern Diplomatic Summit concluded 3 days later, with Rias returning to find the Grimoire estate still undergoing repairs. Percy met her at the transportation circle, unable to suppress his smile at seeing her again despite the grim circumstances. I leave you alone for 3 days, she said, surveying the damage to the gardens. And you redecorate without consulting me. Thought the place needed a more rustic look, Percy replied, falling into step beside her. How was the summit? Productive, surprisingly. News of the attack actually strengthened our position. Several previously neutral houses have committed to supporting Searsex's administration in light of the old Satan faction's alliance with an outside entity. Silver linings, Percy noted. Though I doubt Oceanus and his friends are finished. Far from it. Rias's expression turned serious. My brother has called an emergency council session for tomorrow. All available intelligence suggests this was merely the first phase of a coordinated campaign. They reached the manor's main entrance, where repair work was ongoing, devils using magic to restore Amagged stonework while others reinforced the protective barriers around the property. Searsex wants you there, Rias continued as they entered. Your insights on Oceanus could be crucial to understanding what comes next. Happy to help, Percy said, though Titan psychology isn't exactly my specialty. You fought him directly, Rias pointed out. That provides perspective no one else has. The Y made their way to a sitting room that had been converted into a temporary command center, maps and tactical displays covering the walls. Rias dismissed the staff with a gesture, leaving them alone for the first time since her return. As soon as the door closed, she turned to him with an intensity that had nothing to do with tactical planning. Are you all right, really? Percy nodded, touched by her concern. Tired, but intact. Oceanus is powerful, but not invincible. Especially not here, where his connection to water is different than in my former world. Rias caught the correction but didn't comment on it. Instead, she stepped closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest in that now familiar gesture. When I heard about the attack, about you facing a Titan alone. Hey, Percy covered her hand with his. I'm still here. It'll take more than an ancient sea god with identity issues to get rid of me. The joke earned a small smile, though concern still shadowed her eyes. Is escalating faster than we anticipated. The alliance between Oceanus and the old Satan faction changes everything. If other pantheons take sides. One crisis at a time, Percy suggested gently. Right now, we focus on the threat in front of us. Rias nodded, visibly gathering herself. You're right, and speaking of what's in front of us. She glanced around the makeshift command center. This isn't how I imagined having our conversation about us. The shift in topic caught Percy off guard, though not unpleasantly. We could postpone, find a better time. No, Rias interrupted. If recent events have proven anything, it's that better times are luxury we may not have. She was right, of course. Their lives had been one crisis after another since the moment they met, with interludes becoming increasingly rare and precious. All right, Percy agreed. Let's talk. Rias took a breath, organizing her thoughts. What's developing between us is significant. Not just personally, but politically. A relationship between the Grimoire heir and a reincarnated former demigod would be unprecedented. Would it cause problems for you? Percy asked directly. With your family, your position. Some, she acknowledged, though less than you might expect. My brother has always encouraged me to follow my heart, and my parents value happiness over tradition. A smile touched her lips. Besides, your actions these past months have earned considerable respect among Devil Society. Defeating Diodora, defending our territory, you've proven your value beyond your unique powers. Percy absorbed this, somewhat surprised. He'd been so focused on adapting to his new existence that he hadn't fully registered his changing status in Devil Society. What about you? Rias asked. This world is still relatively new to you. Your past life, your connections there, I wouldn't want you to feel pressured into something because of our current circumstances. The question deserved honest consideration. Percy thought about his former life, Camp Half-Blood, his mother, his friends. The grief remained, but it had transformed over time from a raw wound to something more like a scar, present but no longer debilitating. I miss them, he said simply. I always will, but this is my life now, my reality. And he paused, searching for the right words. You're the person who gave me a second chance. Who saw value in me when I was literally dying. That means something. It's more than gratitude, though, Rias said, not quite a question. Much more, Percy confirmed, meeting her gaze. What I feel for you has nothing to do with debt or circumstance. It's about who you are, your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. The way you balance duty and desire. The way you fight for what matters. Rias's expression softened, a vulnerability she rarely displayed in public showing through. And I admire your adaptability, your courage in facing each new challenge. Your refusal to be defined by others' expectations. She stepped closer. It seems we've each found something unexpected in the other. So where does that leave us? Percy asked. Dating. Courting. Is there a specific devil protocol for this situation? Rias laughed, the sound brightening the tactical gloom of the command center. There are traditional courtship rituals, yes, but they typically involve formal declarations before both families. Gift exchanges of magical artifacts, and sometimes ritual combat with rival suitors. Of course they do, Percy said with a grin. Can't just do dinner and a movie like normal people. Where would be the fun in that? Rias teased. Then, more seriously, but we can define this however we want, Percy. That's the advantage of unprecedented situations, we write the rules as we go. The freedom in that statement resonated with Percy. His entire life had been shaped by ancient prophecies and divine expectations. Even his death and rebirth had followed someone else's decision. But this relationship with Rias, could be something they created together, on their own terms. I like the sound of that, he said, drawing her closer. Though I should warn you, rule following has never been my strong suit. I've noticed, Rias replied, her arms slipping around his neck. It's part of your charm. Their second kiss was different from their first, less urgent, more exploratory. A promise rather than a declaration. When they separated, Percy felt a certainty that had been building for months finally crystallize into decision. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, we face it together. Together, Rias agreed. Though right now, what comes next is a very long briefing with my brother and probably several hours of tactical planning. Percy groaned theatrically. The romance is already fading. Her laughter followed them as they left the command center, hands linked in a simple but significant gesture. Whatever storms approached, literal or figurative, they would weather them side by side. The storms came sooner than anyone anticipated. Over the following weeks, attacks spread across devil territories, water sources corrupted, coastal regions flooded. With primordial liquid that rejected control, rivers reversing course to strand communities. Percy found himself constantly on the move, responding to crises as they emerged. His unique abilities made him the most effective countermeasure against Oceanus's water manipulation, though even he could only be in one place at a time. The pattern became clear after the third coordinated attack, Oceanus W. as systematically cutting off devil territories from their water supplies while the old Satan faction exploited the resulting chaos to rebuild their influence. Houses that had previously rejected our traditionalist rhetoric now listened more carefully when essential resources became scarce. It's a masterful strategy, Sears X acknowledged during a late-night council session. Attacking basic infrastructure rather than military targets. Creating dependency rather than direct confrontation. And splitting our response between multiple fronts, Ajuka added. We can't focus solely on Oceanus. When the old Satan faction is gaining political ground through these manufactured crises. Percy studied the updated map showing affected territories. There's another pattern emerging, he noted, indicating several locations that had been targeted in sequence. He's working his way inward in a spiral. If this continues, the next major target will be the Phoenix territory, Rias finished, seeing the pattern. Their natural springs are famous throughout the underworld. And Lord Phoenix has been one of my strongest allies, Sears X noted grimly. This isn't just tactical, it's personal and political. Percy had come to understand devil politics better over the past months, recognizing how intertwined personal relationships and political alliances were in this society. An attack on House Phoenix would be both strategically valuable and symbolically powerful. We need to set a trap, he suggested. Stop reacting and force Oceanus to fight on our terms. Sears X raised an eyebrow. You have a specific approach in mind. Actually, yes. Percy moved to the tactical display, adjusting the map to show the Phoenix territory in detail. Their springs connect to an underground river system that eventually feeds into the Sea of Tears. If we use that connection, make Oceanus think he's found a vulnerability. We could lure him into a prepared battlefield, Ajuka concluded, following Percy's reasoning. Interesting approach. What would you need? Time to prepare the environment. And bait he can't resist. All eyes turned to Percy, understanding dawning. Rias stiffened beside him. You're suggesting using yourself as bait. After Oceanus has made it clear he wants to cleanse your existence. That's exactly why it would work, Percy pointed out. His fixation on me is personal. Tactical considerations become secondary when personal vendetta is involved. It's too risky, Rias objected. We've seen how powerful he is, especially when controlling water directly. Which is why we don't fight him in water. Percy countered. Not entirely, anyway. We create an environment that limits his advantages while maximizing ours. The discussion continued late into the night, strategies proposed and discarded. Contingencies planned for every possible scenario. By dawn, they had a plan, risky but potentially decisive if executed correctly. As the council disbanded, Rias pulled Percy aside, her expression a mixture of professional respect and personal concern. I understand the tactical logic, she said quietly. But I don't have to like it. If there was another way. Percy began. There isn't, she acknowledged. You're right about Oceanus's fixation. No other bait would be as effective. She sighed, the weight of leadership evident in her posture. Just promise me you'll be careful. No unnecessary heroics. When have I ever been unnecessarily heroic? Percy asked with mock offense. Do you want that list alphabetically or chronologically? Rias returned dryly. Their banter lightened the moment. But the underlying tension remained. The coming confrontation with Oceanus represented more than just another battle. It was potentially the turning point in a conflict. ICT that threatened the stability of the entire underworld. The trap was set 3 days later. Percy stood alone at the edge of the famed Phoenix Springs, their crystal-clear waters reflecting the crimson sky above. To all appearances, he was conducting a routine inspection of the water's source, just as he had done at dozens of other locations in recent weeks. In reality, every aspect of the environment had been carefully prepared. Beneath the surface, a complex network of spell matrices waited to be activated, not to prevent Oceanus's arrival, but to contain him once he appeared. Along the perimeter, concealed in underground chambers, waited elite forces from Searsex's personal guard, ready to emerge at the critical moment. And most importantly, Percy himself was the central component of the trap, both bait and trigger. His presence would draw Oceanus, and his unique abilities would spring the final elements when the time was right. All teams in position, came Graphia's voice through. A communication spell only Percy could hear. Monitoring systems detect disturbances in the Sea of Tears. He's coming. Understood, Percy replied quietly. Initiating Phase 1, he knelt at the water's edge, placing his hands on the surface. To any observer, it would appear he was testing the water's purity. In reality, he was extending his senses deep into the spring's source, following the underground river that connected it to the distant Sea of Tears. There, miles away but approaching rapidly, he felt Oceanus's consciousness flowing upstream against the natural current. The Titan moved with purpose, clearly aware of Percy's presence and eager to confront him directly. Contact imminent, Percy reported. He's moving faster than anticipated. Accelerating timeline. Understood, Graphia acknowledged. Forces standing by. Percy withdrew his hands from the water, feigning obliviousness to the approaching threat. He stood, made a show of recording observations on a magical tablet. Then set it aside as if preparing to depart. The spring's surface shattered upward as Oceanus erupted from the depths, no longer content with subtle corruption but manifesting in full physical form. The Titan towered over Percy, his body composed of water that constantly shifted between states, features flowing like liquid sculpture. Perseus Jackson, Oceanus intoned, his voice reverberating across the landscape. We meet again, as destiny demands. Destiny. Percy raised an eyebrow, projecting casual confidence despite the imposing figure before him. Or just predictable behavior. You're becoming formulaic, Oceanus. The Titan's fluid features hardened with anger. Your arrogance grows tedious, abomination. Our previous encounter was merely preliminary, a testing of your capabilities. Today, you face the full might of a primordial sea god. Funny, Percy remarked, circling slowly away from the spring, drawing Oceanus's attention with him. I thought the same thing about our last fight. Just warming up, getting a feel for how you operate. The calculated provocation worked. Oceanus surged forward, abandoning the spring to pursue Percy across the rocky terrain that surrounded it. Exactly as planned. Careful, Percy, came Rias's voice through the communication spell. She wasn't supposed to be monitoring the operation directly, but Percy wasn't surprised she'd inserted herself into the command structure. He's more powerful than before. Energy readings are off the charts. Indeed, Oceanus radiated power that made the air itself shimmer around him. The Titan had clearly been gathering strength since their last encounter, perhaps drawing from every corrupted water source throughout the underworld. You think to lead me into a trap? Oceanus laughed, gesturing expansively. Water erupted from the ground beneath Percy's feet, forcing him to leap aside. I am Oceanus. The water itself answers to me, regardless of what petty spells you've laid. Percy rolled to his feet, maintaining the appearance of being on the defensive while continuing to lead the Titan toward the prepared battleground. Big talk from someone who got his butt kicked by a devil child last time. Oceanus roared, sending a tidal wave of water crashing toward Percy. But this time, Percy didn't dodge or counter directly. Instead, he allowed the water to hit him, and pass through him as if he were made of mist. The Titan faltered, confusion evident in his liquid features. What trickery is this? The illusion of Percy, crafted by Ajuka's most skilled mages, smiled. Just warming up. The real Percy struck from behind, emerging from a concealed position with Riptide blazing in his hand. The celestial bronze blade, enhanced with devil energy, slashed across Oceanus's back, drawing a howl of genuine pain from the Titan. Now, Percy commanded through the communication link. The prepared battlefield activated at once. Spell matrices buried beneath the rocky plain erupted with power, creating a dome of energy that sealed the area, not to contain Oceanus physically, but to prevent him from dissolving into water and escaping as he had during their previous encounter. Simultaneously, the ground beneath them transformed. What had appeared to be ordinary rock liquefied and reformed into a complex labyrinth of alternating materials, some sections water, others solid stone, others swirling with devil energy that rejected water control entirely. Phase 2 complete, reported Graphia. Battlefield secured. Oceanus recovered quickly from the initial assault, whirling to face the real Percy with rage etched into his fluid features. Clever, he acknowledged, but inadequate. The Titan extended his hands, calling to the water sections of the labyrinth. They responded, but sluggishly, the SPL matrices beneath the surface interfering with his control, forcing him to exert greater effort for lesser effect. Having performance issues, Percy taunted, dancing backward across a stone pathway. Happens to the best of Titans. I hear. Oceanus abandoned subtlety for raw power, hurling himself forward in a rush of water and rage. Percy met the charge with precision rather than matching force. Riptide flashing in complex patterns that Kiba had drilled into him over months of training, each strike targeting the points where Oceanus's liquid form was most vulnerable. They clashed through the labyrinth, each using the environment to their advantage. Where water sections appeared, Oceanus gained temporary strength. Where devil energy saturated the ground, Percy had the upper hand. The constantly shifting battlefield prevented either combatant from establishing dominance for more than moments at a time. Secondary forces, deploy, came Searsex's command through the communication network. From concealed chambers around the perimeter, elite devil warriors emerged, not to engage Oceanus directly, but to target something else entirely. They concentrated their attacks on specific points of the battlefield, activating the final phase of the trap. The labyrinth began to change again, this time more dramatically. Water sections didn't simply disappear, they transformed into a new substance. One that Percy and Ajuka had developed specifically for this confrontation. It appeared to be water but contained properties of devil energy at its molecular level, water that rejected Oceanus's fundamental control. What have you done? ! Quote. The Titan bellowed as sections of the battlefield that should have empowered him instead became hostile to his very nature. Chemical engineering, Percy replied, pressing his advantage. Turns out devil magic can alter elemental structures in ways your old school powers can't touch. It wasn't quite true, the transformed water was still experimentally unstable, requiring constant reinforcement from the supporting devil forces. But Oceanus didn't need to know that detail. The Titan fought with increasing desperation as more of the battlefield turned against him. His attacks grew wilder, More destructive but less precise. Percy maintained disciplined focus, conserving energy while allowing Oceanus to exhaust himself against the hostile environment. You think this victory means anything? Oceanus snarled after a particularly vicious exchange left him visibly diminished, his watery form struggling to maintain cohesion. I am merely one aspect of a greater awakening. The old boundaries between pantheons are dissolving, godling. What comes next will make our conflict seem insignificant. The warning triggered alarms in Percy's mind, not just threats from a losing opponent but specific intelligence that aligned with other reports they'd received. The old Satan faction's alliance with Oceanus might be just one instance of a broader pattern. Who else is involved? Percy demanded, closing the distance between them. What? Greater awakening. Oceanus laughed, the sound gurgling through his increasingly unstable form. You think too small, nephew. This is not about devils and demigods, or even titans and Olympians. The primordials stir, those who existed before pantheons divided reality into neat domains. A chill ran through Percy. That had nothing to do with the water surrounding them. Primordials, entities like Erebos, like Gaia, represented threats that transcended normal divine politics. Enough talk, Percy decided, signaling the final phase. Time to end this. At his command, the elite devil forces concentrated their power on the containment dome, reinforcing it while simultaneously contracting its boundaries. The battlefield compressed around them, forcing Oceanus into an increasingly confined space where his weakened water powers found less and less to manipulate. Percy pressed forward relentlessly, riptide glowing. With combined celestial bronze and devil energy, a weapon that represented the perfect synthesis of his dual nature. Each strike disrupted Oceanus's form more severely than the last, the Titan's rig. Narrative abilities failing against the unique properties of Percy's blade. You cannot destroy me, Oceanus gasped as his form diminished further. I am primordial water itself. I will reform, as water always does. Maybe, Percy acknowledged, but not anytime soon, and not in the underworld. With a final surge of effort, Percy channeled all his power into Riptide and struck at the very core of Oceanus's being, not his physical form but the conceptual essence that defined him. The blade plunged into swirling water and met something solid at its center, a crystalline structure that pulsed with ancient power. Oceanus screamed, not in pain but in fundamental denial of what was happening. The crystal fractured under Riptide's edge, and the Titan's form exploded outward in a deluge that slammed against the containment dome before dissipating into mist. Where Oceanus had stood, only the cracked crystal remained, floating in midair for a moment before falling to the rocky ground with a sound like ice breaking. Target neutralized, Percy reported through the communication link, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Oceanus is contained. The containment dome dissolved as the elite forces ceased their efforts. The labyrinth reverted to ordinary stone. In the sudden silence, Percy could hear distant cheers from the devil warriors who had witnessed the Titan's defeat. Rias was the first to reach him, materializing through a transportation circle with no pretense of maintaining command distance. You're all right, she said, relief evident in her voice as she took in his bedraggled but intact appearance. Told you. Percy managed a tired smile. No unnecessary heroics. Her answering smile was interrupted by Sirzex's arrival with Ajuka and several high-ranking devils. Their attendee, On immediately focused on the cracked crystal lying on the ground. As that, Ajuka began, approaching cautiously. His core, Percy confirmed. Or something like it, the physical manifestation of his essence in this realm. Ajuka produced a specialized containment device, carefully lifting the crystal without touching it directly. Fascinating. With this, we may develop permanent countermeasures against similar incursions. And the old Satan faction has lost their most powerful ally, Sirzex added with satisfaction. Reports are already coming in of rebel forces retreating across multiple fronts. Percy should have felt triumphant. The threat that had consumed weeks of effort had been neutralized, the immediate crisis averted. Instead, Oceanus's final warning echoed in his mind, talk of primordials stirring. Of boundaries dissolving between pantheons. We need to talk, he said to Sirzex, his tone serious enough that the celebration around them quieted. Oceanus said something just before the end. Something about a greater awakening, involving primordial entities. Sirzex's expression hardened. My office, 1 hour. Bring rias. He turned to the assembled devils. Secure the area. Full spectrum magical sweeps. I want any trace of Oceanus's power contained and catalogued. As the scene transformed from battlefield to research site, Percy found a quiet moment with rias at the perimeter. The adrenaline of combat was fading, leaving room for other considerations, personal ones that had been necessarily set aside during the crisis. So, he said, watching the devils work with efficient precision. One ancient sea god defeated, potential pantheon spanning threat identified. Just another day at the office. Rias laughed softly, leaning against him with comfortable familiarity. Is this the part where you suggest celebrating our victory with something other than tactical debriefings? Actually, Percy said, surprising himself with the clarity of his decision, is the part where I ask you to marry me. Rias blinked, clearly caught off guard. What? Percy turned to face her fully. I almost didn't say it, thought it might seem impulsive or battlefield adrenaline driven. But it's not. He took her hands in his. These past months have shown me what matters. Who matters? And if there really is some greater awakening coming, some threat beyond what we've faced so far. I don't want to wait for some hypothetical perfect moment that might never come. Rias studied him, her initial surprise giving way to thoughtful consideration. You realize Devil Ma, riages are political as well as personal. There would be ceremonies, negotiations between houses, formal contracts. I know, Percy acknowledged. And I'm ready for all of it. If you are. A slow smile spread across her face, warming her eyes. Perseus Jackson, former demigod and current devil, are you formally proposing an alliance between yourself and House Grimoire? I'm proposing a lot more than that, he replied, matching her formal tone with a hint of humor. But yes, that's part of the package. Rias stepped closer, her hands tightening around his. Then yes, to all of it. The simplicity of her acceptance, after all they'd been through together, seemed perfectly appropriate. No grand gestures needed, no elaborate declarations, just two people who had found something unexpected in each other, choosing to face whatever came next as one. Their kiss was interrupted by a discreet cough. They turned to find Graphia standing nearby, her expression professionally neutral despite having clearly witnessed the moment. Lady Rias, Lord Sirzex has moved the briefing forward. Your presence is requested immediately. Her eyes shifted to Percy. Both of you. Of course, Rias replied, composing herself instantly into the air of House Grimoire rather than the woman who had just accepted a marriage proposal. We'll come at once. As they followed Graphia toward the transportation circle, Percy leaned close to Rias. Think your brother will approve of the timing or the match? She whispered back. Both. Rias smiled. He's been expecting this for months. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he's already drafted the formal announcements. Percy laughed softly. Devil politics. Always 3 steps ahead. It keeps life interesting, she replied. Then, more seriously, whatever Oceanus meant about Primordial's awakening, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Together, Percy agreed, stepping into the transportation circle beside her. I like the sound of that. The wedding of Rias Grimoire and Percy Jackson became the most discussed event in Devil Society almost before they announced it formally. What might have been months of preparations was accelerated to weeks due to the uncertain security situation. Better to formalize their union quickly than risk further complications from whatever greater awakening Oceanus had warned about. Percy found himself swept up in a whirlwind of devil traditions and protocols, most of which made Greek wedding customs seem straightforward by comparison. There were ritual gift exchanges between houses complicated by Percy's lack of formal house status. Ceremonial combat demonstrations, which he navigated with unexpected skill, and endless negotiations over everything from territory rights to magical inheritance laws. Through it all, Sirzex proved surprisingly supportive, smoothing diplomatic paths that might otherwise have been impassable. Whether motivated by genuine approval of the match or strategic considerations about Percy's unique abilities, his advocacy silenced many potential objections from traditional houses. The ceremony will take place in the Grand Cathedral, Graphia explained during one particularly overwhelming planning session. It's the most defensible major venue, and the symbolic importance cannot be overlooked. No reincarnated devil has ever been married there before. So no pressure, Percy muttered, reviewing the lengthy document outlining his ceremonial responsibilities. Just revolutionizing devil society while trying not to trip over my formal robes. Rias squeezed his hand under the table. You've faced worse odds. The comment, meant lightly, carried unexpected weight. In the weeks since Oceanus's defeat, intelligence reports had confirmed elements of the Titan's warning. Dimensional disturbances were increasing across multiple pantheons, not just the boundary between devil territories and the Greek realm. Something was indeed stirring in the spaces between established mythological domains. But today, those concerns were temporarily set aside. The grand cathedral of the underworld blazed with magical light, its ancient architecture enhanced with illusion. That made the interior seem even more vast and impressive than its actual dimensions. Devils from every major house filled the ornate pews, while representatives from allied supernatural factions occupied specially designated areas. Percy stood at the altar, dressed in formal attire that combined traditional devil styling with subtle elements honoring his Greek heritage, a trident embroidered in silver thread on midnight blue fabric. Waves curling along the edges of his ceremonial cloak. Beside him stood Kiba, serving as his formal witness in a devil tradition roughly equivalent to a best man. Nervous? Kiba asked quietly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Not about marrying Rias, Percy replied honestly. Just about doing it in front of half the underworld without accidentally violating some obscure protocol. Kiba chuckled. You'll be fine. Everyone's too busy being impressed that you're here at all to worry about minor ceremonial details. The cathedral's massive doors swung open, and the assembled devils rose as one. Rias entered on her father's arm, resplendent in a gown that seemed to capture the essence of her power, crimson and black, flowing like liquid shadow, delicate patterns that evoked both flames and water where the fabrics overlapped. Percy's breath caught at the sight of her. In that moment, all the politics and prophecies and primordial threats faded to insignificance. There was only Rias, approaching him with that confident grace that had first caught his attention months ago when he awakened to his new existence. The ceremony itself passed, in something of a blur for Percy. Ancient words spoken in devil tongue, magical bonds forming between them as they exchanged vows, the formal recognition of their union by representatives of each great Satan. The political significance of each element registered dimly through the more personal experience of simply being there, with her, making this commitment. When at last they were pronounced unit, according to the laws and traditions of devil society, the cathedral erupted in ceremonial magical displays, light shows that would have put the most elaborate mortal fireworks to shame. Husband, Rias said quietly as they turned to face the assembled guests, the word experimental on her lips. Wife, Percy returned with a smile that managed to be both reverent and slightly mischievous. That wasn't so bad. No one burst into flames or challenged me to a duel. The night is still young, she replied with mock seriousness. The reception will have its own challenges. Indeed, the formal reception that followed in the adjacent Great Hall represented yet another gauntlet of devil protocols, receiving lines where they greeted representatives from every major faction, ritual toasts that carry magical as well as social significance, ceremonial dances whose steps had been established centuries before. Percy navigated it all with growing confidence, no longer the disoriented former demigod, but a devil of recognized status and power. The months since his reincarnation had transformed him in ways that went beyond the physical. He had adapted to this new society, found his place within it while maintaining his essential nature. You've done well, came a familiar voice as Percy took a rare moment alone near one of the hall's massive windows. He turned to find Sirzex approaching, resplendent in formal attire that emphasized his status as a Satan lord. Better than many expected when Rias first reincarnated you. Including you, Percy asked directly. Sirzex smiled. I had reservations. A demigod from another pantheon, bound to my sister's peerage through unprecedented means. The potential complications were significant. And now I see what Rias saw from the beginning. Sirzex's expression turned serious. Someone who adapts without losing himself. Who brings new perspective without rejecting tradition entirely. Who fights not just with power but with principle. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Percy Jackson. Formally and completely, The gesture meant more than Percy had anticipated. He accepted the handshake with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for supporting us, for making this possible. My sister's happiness has always been paramount," Circex replied. "Though I won't pretend there weren't strategic considerations as well." His gaze shifted to where Rias was engaged in conversation with representatives from several noble houses. "The alliance between water and fire that you two represent has symbolic power beyond the personal. In uncertain times, such symbols matter." Before Percy could respond, a subtle vibration ran through the floor beneath them. So slight that most of the guests didn't notice, continuing their celebrations uninterrupted. But Percy felt it, and from Cirzex's suddenly alert posture, so did he. "The wards," Percy said quietly, extending his senses outward. The Grand Cathedral was protected by the most powerful defensive magic in the underworld, layers upon layers of spells designed to prevent unauthorized entry or attack. Something was testing those defenses. Indeed, Cirzex's casual demeanor vanished, replaced by the focused intensity of a Satan lord. Discreetly alert Ajuka and Graphia. "I'll inform the security forces." Percy nodded, already moving through the crowd toward where Ajuka stood conversing with several elder devils. He maintained a smile, keeping his pace unhurried to avoid triggering alarm among the guests. Centuries of devil politics had perfected the art of crisis management without public panic. Another tremor, stronger this time. A few guests paused in their conversations, glancing around with confusion. The massive chandeliers overhead swayed slightly, their magical lights flickering. Percy reached Ajuka just as the devil scientist was excusing himself from his conversation, clearly having felt the disturbance as well. "Southeast quadrant," Ajuka said without preamble when Percy approached. "The wards are under systematic attack." "Precise, methodical, Oceanus?" Percy asked, though he already suspected otherwise. "No, different signature entirely." Ajuka's eyes narrowed in concentration as he accessed information through a personal spell matrix. Multiple points of origin, coordinated. Across the hall, Percy saw Rias extracting herself from her conversation, moving with graceful purpose toward them. Their eyes met briefly, a world of understanding passing between them. This was no random attack. The timing was deliberate, targeting their wedding specifically. A third tremor shook the cathedral, strong enough that conversation halted throughout the hall. The magical lights dimmed momentarily, then flared brighter than before as backup systems engaged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cirzex's voice carried effortlessly across the space, projected without visible magic. "Please remain calm. We're experiencing minor magical fluctuations from tonight's extensive ceremonial workings. Security protocols are engaging as a precaution only." The explanation was plausible enough to reassure most guests, who gradually resumed their conversations. But high-ranking devils and those with military experience began moving with purpose toward designated positions around the perimeter of the hall. Rias reached Percy's side, her formal smile still in place though her eyes conveyed urgency. "Status: coordinated attack on the wards," Percy summarized. "Unknown origin, but strong enough to be felt inside. Security forces mobilizing quietly." She nodded, scanning the room. "Most of the guests are civilians. If the wards fail, they won't," Ajuka interjected with quiet confidence. "I designed them myself. Whatever is attacking would need unprecedented power to breach them completely." As if in direct challenge to his assertion, a fourth tremor rocked the cathedral, this one strong enough to send glasses tumbling from tables and guests staggering to maintain balance. The magical lights flickered wildly, plunging the hull into momentary darkness before stabilizing at a diminished level. "Unprecedented power," Percy noted grimly. "Like maybe a primordial entity." Ajuka's expression tightened. "Possible, though the signature doesn't match anything in our records." "Records don't help much when boundaries between pantheons are dissolving," Percy pointed out. "Could be something from any mythology, or something older than all of them." The defensive wards surrounding the cathedral suddenly became visible, layers of complex magical pattern. Illuminating like emergency lights as they strained against external pressure. The sight was both reassuring and alarming. The defenses were holding, but they shouldn't have been visible at all under normal circumstances. "Begin evacuation protocols," Circex commanded, no longer maintaining the pretense of normalcy. "Priority sequence," starting with non-combatants. Devil security forces moved with practiced efficiency, directing guests toward designated transportation circles that would remove them from the danger zone. There was remarkably little panic. Devil society had experienced upheaval over the centuries that emergency protocols were deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness. Percy and Rias found themselves at the center of a protective formation, high-ranking Devi LS including Sirzex and Ajuka positioning themselves to defend the newly married couple. "We should be helping with the evacuation," Percy protested. "You are the primary targets," Graphia informed him crisply, materializing beside them. "Intelligence suggests this attack was timed specifically to disrupt your union." "Why?" Rias demanded. "What threat does our marriage pose?" Before anyone could answer, the cathedral's massive stained glass windows shattered inward, sending shards of magical glass raining down on the assembly. Through the gaping openings poured what appeared at first glance to be black smoke, but as it coalesced in the center of the hall, Percy recognized it for what it really was. "Erebos," he breathed, recognition and dread mingling in his voice. Not the primordial entity itself, but its essence, the same cosmic darkness that had tried to consume Camp Half-Blood, that had followed Percy into death and beyond. It swirled into a vortex at the center of the hall, forming a tear in reality similar to what had appeared during Percy's battle with Diodora months ago. "Impossible," Ajuka muttered, hands already weaving complex spell matrices to counter the intrusion. He-dimensional barriers should prevent direct manifestation. Unless they're being weakened from multiple sides simultaneously, Sirzex theorized, his own power gathering around him like a crimson aura. A coordinated assault across pantheons. From the swirling vortex emerged a figure, the same shadow creature that had confronted Percy in the raiding game dimension, but larger now, more defined. Where before it had been roughly humanoid, now it resembled something more primal, a being composed of absolute darkness with multiple limbs that seemed to both exist and not exist simultaneously. "The union is forbidden," it intoned in that voice that bypassed ears to resonate directly in the mind. "The convergence of waters must not be completed." Percy stepped forward, positioning himself between the creature and Rias. Little late for objections. The ceremony's already done. The shadow entity's form rippled with what might have been laughter. "Ceremonies are symbolic. Bonds can be broken." Its attention shifted to Rias. "Daughter of destruction, your fire was never meant to merge with his waters. Such convergence threatens the ancient boundaries." "What boundaries?" Rias demanded, her own destructive power gathering around her hands. "What convergence?" Instead of answering, the entity expanded suddenly, tendrils of darkness lashing out toward them with impossible speed. Percy reacted instinctively, calling water from every available source. Decorative fountains, drink glasses, even the moisture in the air itself. The water formed a barrier around them just as the shadow tendrils struck. But unlike their previous encounter, the entity seemed prepared for Percy's defense. The darkness flowed around the water barrier, seeking gaps, probing for weaknesses. Where tendrils made contact with the water, it began to boil away into steam, as if the darkness consumed it at a fundamental level. "Percy," Rias called in warning, generating a shield of destructive energy to complement his water barrier. The combination proved temporarily effective. Where water failed, Rias's energy destroyed the encroaching darkness. But the entity adapted quickly, its attacks becoming more precise, targeting the seams where their different powers met. Around them, the remaining devils launched their own counter-offensive. Sirzex unleashed destructive magic that would have annihilated any conventional enemy, while Ajuka deployed esoteric spells that warped space itself around the entity. Other high-ranking devils contributed their specialized abilities, creating a devastating barrage of magical attacks. The shadow creature absorbed it all, growing larger with each assault. "Your powers are known," it announced, its voice deepening as its form expanded. "Cataloged, anticipated, but it gestured toward Percy and Rias's combined defense. This convergence represents unknown potential. Unacceptable risk." Percy felt the strain of maintaining his water barrier against the consuming darkness. Whatever this entity was, it represented a more direct manifestation of Erebos' power than he had faced before, darkness that didn't just obscure light but devoured existence itself. "We need to close that portal," he said to Rias, nodding toward the swirling vortex from which the entity had emerged. Cut off its connection to Erebos. Agreed, she replied, never taking her eyes off the attacking tendrils. But how? Conventional sealing spells aren't working. Percy thought rapidly, remembering his first encounter with Erebos' breach above Camp Half-Blood. He had closed it then by sacrificing himself, using his connection to water to create a barrier between dimensions. But that approach had nearly destroyed him even before his devil transformation. Then an idea struck. Not sacrifice but synthesis. Not one power alone but two combined. Rias, he said urgently. Remember how we've been practicing combining our abilities. Water and destruction in tandem. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Untested at this scale. Best time to experiment, Percy replied with a grim smile. Cover me while I gather enough water. Rias nodded, stepping forward to take full control of their defensive barrier. Her destructive magic expanded, forming a dome of crimson energy around them that temporarily held the shadow tendrils at bay. Percy closed his eyes, extending his senses beyond the immediate battle. The cathedral sat near one of the underworld's minor rivers, not as massive as the river Styx or Acheron, but substantial enough for his purposes. With tremendous effort, he called to that water, pulling it up through the foundation of the cathedral itself, channeling it through cracks and seams in the ancient stonework. The floor beneath them began to glisten as water seeped upward, first in droplets, then in streams, finally in a rushing torrent that circled around Percy's feet without touching Rias's magic. He infused the water with his devil energy, causing it to gl out with that now familiar crimson light from within. Now, Percy shouted when he had gathered enough. Rias responded instantly, redirecting her destructive energy from defense to offense, but instead of launching it at the shadow entity directly, she channeled it into Percy's water. The combination created something new, water that carried destructive essence within it, liquid that could unmake as well as reform. Together, they directed this hybrid force toward the dimensional tear, not attacking the shadow entity but targeting its source. The energized water struck the vortex like a lance, boring into its center where reality had been breached. The shadow creature recognized the threat too late. It abandoned its attack on the devils to lunge toward Percy and Rias, but Circex and the others intercepted, buying crucial seconds with renewed magical assaults. More pressure, Percy urged, pushing his power to its limits. The water responded, accelerating into the tear with increasing force. It's working. Indeed, the vortex was beginning to contract around the point of impact, the cosmic darkness folding in on itself as the combined water and destruction energy disrupted its fundamental structure. The shadow entity howled, a sound that existed more as concept than actual noise, as its connection to Erebos weakened. Almost there, Rias gritted through clenched teeth, her own power straining with the effort. With a final surge of will, Percy and Rias pushed their combined energies to the absolute limit. The water lance pulsed with blinding crimson light, driving deep into the heart of the vortex. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The tear remained, the entity still present though visibly weakened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing and then mending, the vortex collapsed. The implosion created a shockwave that knocked everyone in the cathedral off their feet, extinguished every magical light, and shattered the remaining windows. In the sudden darkness, the faint glow of emergency wards provided illumination. The shadow entity remained, but drastically diminished, no longer a towering manifestation of cosmic darkness but a fragmented shade, its foe. Destabilizing without its connection to Erebos. This delay changes nothing, it hissed, its voice fading. The convergence cannot stand. The waters must remain separate. Before anyone could respond, the entity dissolved into wisps of darkness that scattered throughout the cathedral before disappearing entirely, not destroyed but retreated, conserving what remained of its essence. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the cathedral's vaulted ceiling and the occasional groan of shifting stonework. Percy helped Rias to her feet, both of them exhausted from the unprecedented channeling of their combined powers. Everyone alive, Percy called out, squinting through the gloom. Remarkably, yes, came Cirzex's voice as magical lights began to reactivate around the perimeter. Though I believe we can officially conclude the reception portion of the evening. The attempt at humor drew scattered nervous laughter from the devils who remained, mostly high-ranking officials and security forces. The civilian guests having been successfully evacuated during the battle's early stages. As emergency procedures engaged and damage assessment began, Percy and Rias found a quiet moment amid the chaos. Supporting each other both physically and emotionally. "Not exactly the wedding night I imagined," Percy said, surveying the devastated cathedral. "No," Rias agreed, her foe. RMAL gown torn and water-stained but her spirit undiminished. "Though perhaps appropriate for us. We've never done anything the conventional way." Percy smiled despite the exhaustion and lingering tension. True enough. His expression sobered as he recalled the entity's words. But what was all that about? Convergence of waters and ancient boundaries. "I don't know," Rias admitted. "But I suspect we've stumbled into something larger than devil politics or even pantheon disputes. Something fundamental to the structure of mythological reality itself." Sierzeks approached, his formal attire similarly battle-worn. "An assessment I share," he said, having overheard their conversation. This attack wasn't merely about disrupting a politically significant union. The entity's fixation on water specifically, on convergence. He shook his head. "We're missing crucial context." Oceanus's warning about Primordial's awakening, Percy recalled. "Erebos's persistent interest in me specifically. It can't be coincidence." "Agreed," Sierzeks said, "which is why, as much as I regret interrupting your newly wedded bliss, we need to accelerate our investigation into these cross-pantheon disturbances." He looked between them seriously. Starting with a more thorough exploration of Percy's unique connection to water, both as a former demigod and as a devil. Rias straightened, her exhaustion visibly set aside as she shifted into strategic thinking. The research facility in the Western Territories would be ideal. Isolated, secure, with access to both conventional laboratories and magical resources. Percy nodded, accepting the necessity even as he inwardly sighed at the prospect of postponing any proper honeymoon. "When do we leave?" "Dawn," Sierzeks replied. "We'll arrange secure transport and appropriate cover stories to avoid tipping our hand to whatever forces are coordinating these attacks." As Sierzeks departed to oversee the continuing security response, Percy turned to Rias with a rueful smile. "So much for traditional post-wedding celebrations. We'll have time," she assured him, taking his hand. "After we understand what we're facing. After we secure whatever this convergence represents." Percy squeezed her hand gently. "Together, always," Rias agreed, leaning against him as they watched devils working to restore order to the shattered cathedral. "Though perhaps next time, we should consider a smaller venue. Something with fewer windows for cosmic darkness to break through." Percy laughed, the sound brightening the somber aftermath of battle. "Noted for our anniversary plans. Assuming the primordial entities of multiple pantheons don't completely unravel reality before then." "They wouldn't dare," Rias replied with mock severity. "They've seen what happens when they interrupt a Grimoire celebration." As they joined the recovery efforts, Percy reflected on how far he had come from that moment of sacrifice above Camp Half-Blood, death and rebirth, adaptation to a new existence. Finding unexpected connection and purpose in a world he'd never imagined. Whatever mysteries awaited regarding his unique nature, whatever threats emerged from the dissolving boundaries between pantheons. He faced them not as the isolated hero of prophecy he had once been, but as part of something larger. The son of Poseidon had become something new, not diminished by his transformation. As Oceanus had claimed, but expanded. Water and devil essence, Greek heritage and underworld future, combined into something unprecedented. Something that apparently threatened the very structure of mythological reality. Percy smiled to himself. He'd always had a talent for complicating things. Why should his afterlife be any different? Chapter 2 end.